The Stranger, Part 1, Chapter 1, a deep and detailed summary. Introduction. This opening chapter introduces us to one of the most unusual and memorable characters in all of modern literature. His name is Meursault, and from the very first line of the story, we can sense that something is different about him. Something that sets him apart from ordinary people. From the way society expects a person to think, feel, and behave. He does not react to the world the way most people do. He does not perform emotions. He does not pretend. And this quality, this strange, unsettling honesty, is what makes him both fascinating and deeply troubling to read about. The chapter covers a period of roughly 2 days. It begins with Meursault receiving news of his mother's death and ends with him returning to the city of Algiers after the funeral, already thinking about sleep and the next day. Within this short span of time, we are introduced to the world he inhabits, the people around him, and most importantly, the inner world of Meursault himself, a man who observes everything with sharp clarity but feels very little, or at least expresses very little of what he feels. This summary will walk through every part of the chapter in close detail, exploring not just what happens, but why it matters, what it tells us about Meursault, and what themes are beginning to take shape in this remarkable story. The telegram and the decision to travel. The chapter opens with one of the most famous sentences in all of 20th century literature. Meursault tells us, in a flat and simple voice, that his mother has died, but immediately something odd happens. He is not sure exactly when she died. He received a telegram from the elderly care home where she had been living, and the telegram says that she passed away, and that the funeral is tomorrow. But from this message alone, Meursault cannot be certain whether she died today or yesterday. He notes this uncertainty without any apparent distress. He is not crying. He is not shaking. He is simply noting a fact, or rather, noting that he is not entirely sure of the fact. This opening sets the tone for everything that follows. Most people, upon receiving news of their mother's death, would be overwhelmed with grief, or at least with a strong emotional reaction. Meursault, however, responds with a kind of calm, almost detached practicality. His first concern is not his grief. It is the logistics, where the home is located, how long the bus journey will take, whether he can get back in time for work the following evening. The home where his mother lived is located in a town called Marengo, which is about 50 miles from Algiers, the city where Meursault works and lives. He calculates that if he takes the 2 o'clock afternoon bus, he will arrive before nightfall. He will spend the night at the home, keeping vigil beside his mother's body, which is, he notes, the usual thing to do, and then return the next evening. He has already arranged 2 days of leave from his employer. He notices that, under the circumstances, his employer could hardly refuse. And yet, he adds, he had the feeling that his employer looked annoyed. This detail is small, but telling. Meursault is observant. He notices things, but his response to his employer's possible annoyance is not defensiveness or sadness. It is a kind of mild self-correction. He realizes he said something unnecessary. He told his employer, "Sorry, sir, but it's not my fault." And afterwards he reflects that he had no reason to apologize at all. It was the employer's job to offer sympathy, not the other way around. But Meursault said it without thinking, and then thought about it afterwards, with a kind of detached curiosity about his own behavior. This small scene already tells us a great deal. Meursault is not cruel. He is not cold in an aggressive sense. He is simply honest, almost mechanically so. He notices his own actions and evaluates them without much emotional investment. He is a man who lives in the present, observing the world and himself as if from a slight distance. The bus journey and arrival at the home. Meursault takes the 2 o'clock bus. It is a blazing hot afternoon, and this detail, the heat, will become very important throughout the entire story. Heat in this novel is not just a weather condition. It is almost a character in itself. It presses down on people, makes them uncomfortable, distorts their thinking, and in some ways seems to mirror the harsh, indifferent world that Meursault. Before catching the bus, Meursault had lunch at a restaurant run by a man named Sil, who is a regular part of his daily life. Everyone at the restaurant was kind to him. Silist himself said something simple and sincere, that there is no one like a mother. The people at the restaurant walked him to the door when he left, a small gesture of human warmth and solidarity. Meursault notices this kindness, but does not particularly respond to it emotionally. He records it the way he records everything, as a fact, a detail of the day. He also had to rush to borrow a black tie and mourning band from a friend named Emmanuel, who had lost his uncle a few months earlier. This detail is interesting. Meursault did not own mourning clothes. He had to borrow them. This could be read in different ways. Perhaps it simply means he had not experienced a close death recently. Or perhaps it suggests that he was not someone who spent much time thinking about death and its rituals. On the bus, the heat and the movement and his fatigue from rushing around made him drowsy, and he slept for most of the journey. When he woke up, he was leaning against a soldier sitting next to him. The soldier grinned and made a small remark, and Meursault simply nodded. He was not in the mood for conversation. This is consistent with who he is. Not rude, but not interested in small talk either. He is someone who engages with the world on his own terms, in his own time. When he arrived in the village near Marengo, he walked a mile or so to the home on foot. At the entrance, he asked to see his mother right away, but was told he had to see the warden first. He waited, making small conversation with the doorkeeper, and then was taken to the warden's office. The meeting with the warden. The warden is a small man with gray hair and watery blue eyes. He wears a Legion of Honor rosette, a prestigious French decoration, in his buttonhole. He is formal and slightly ceremonious. He shakes Meursault's hand and holds it for a long time, which makes Meursault feel uncomfortable. The warden then consults his records and informs Meursault that his mother entered the home 3 years ago, that she had no money of her own, and that she was entirely dependent on Meursault for her support. There is something slightly accusatory in the way he says this, as if he is subtly suggesting that Meursault did not do enough for his mother, perhaps that he should not have placed her in the home at all, or that he should have visited more often. Meursault begins to explain himself, but the warden cuts him short. He says there is no need to apologize. He has checked the records and understands that Meursault was not in a financial position to care for her full time. His mother needed constant companionship, and young working men like Meursault simply could not provide that. The warden then adds something that Meursault quietly agrees with, that his mother was happier in the home. She had friends there, people her own age. Meursault was too young to have been a proper companion to her. Meursault reflects on this and confirms it in his own mind. When he and his mother lived together, they barely talked. She watched him a lot, but there was little real conversation between them. When she first moved to the home, she cried frequently, but that was simply because she had not yet adjusted. After a month or two, she had settled in completely, and by that point, leaving the home would have upset her just as much as going there had in the beginning. That is why, Meursault tells us, he stopped visiting very often in the last year. He did not want to disrupt her new life. And also, he is honest enough to admit this, because it would have meant giving up his Sundays and dealing with the long bus journey there and back. This passage is one of the most revealing in the chapter. Meursault is not trying to justify himself. He is simply explaining his thinking, honestly and without self-pity or self-glorification. He made a practical decision, and his reasons were partly genuine concern for his mother and partly his own convenience. He does not dress this up or hide it, and this honesty, this refusal to pretend, is something that other characters in the story will find deeply disturbing, even though, in a strange way, it is also one of Meursault's most honest qualities. The mortuary and the keeper. After the meeting with the warden, Meursault is taken to the mortuary, a small building set apart from the main residence. The warden explains that they moved the body here so as not to upset the other elderly residents whenever someone dies at the home. The others become nervous and distressed for several days, which creates extra work for the staff. The mortuary is described as a bright, clean room with whitewashed walls and a large skylight in the ceiling. It is simple and bare. In the center of the room, the coffin rests on two. The lid is in place, but the screws have not been fully tightened yet. A nurse, an Arab woman wearing a blue uniform and a colorful headscarf, sits beside the coffin. A keeper arrives, slightly out of breath from hurrying. The keeper tells Meursault that the lid was put on, but that he was instructed to unscrew it when Meursault arrived, so that he could see his mother one last time. But Meursault quietly tells him not to bother. The keeper is surprised and asks why not. Meursault cannot really give a reason. He simply said no, instinctively. without thinking about it deeply. The keeper accepts this with a simple "I understand," though it is clear that the refusal is unusual. This moment is important. The expectation is that a son, arriving at his mother's funeral, would want to see her face one final time. It is a ritual, a farewell, a way of making the death real and meaningful. Meursault declines this ritual without being able to explain why. It is not that he is horrified or afraid, it simply does not seem necessary to him. This refusal, like so many of Meursault's choices, is not aggressive or deliberate. It is simply honest. He does not feel the need to perform a ritual that does not mean anything to him. The keeper draws up a chair for Meursault near the coffin and sits down behind him. The nurse leaves the room. The keeper whispers to Meursault that she is ill, that she has a tumor. And indeed, Meursault notices that she has a bandage wrapped across her nose and the bridge of her face. Then the keeper offers to leave Meursault alone, but somehow ends up staying anyway, chatting quietly. The keeper is a talkative, pleasant man. He is 64 years old and originally from Paris. He has been at the home for 5 years. He tells Meursault about the local customs, that in this part of the country, because of the intense heat, burials have to happen very quickly. There is no time to grieve slowly. You barely have a chance to understand that someone is gone before the funeral is already happening. His wife, who is apparently also present at the home, tries to shush him for saying things like this to a grieving son, but Meursault genuinely finds it interesting. He had not thought about this aspect of death before, the way climate and geography shape the rituals of mourning. The keeper's comment is significant. It introduces an idea that runs throughout the chapter, that the rituals surrounding death are, in some ways, arbitrary. They differ from place to place. They are shaped by practical concerns as much as by genuine emotion. And Meursault, who is already inclined to see the world in practical rather than emotional terms, finds this interesting rather than upsetting. The long night of the vigil. Night falls quickly. The keeper switches on the bright lamps in the mortuary, and the white walls become almost blinding. Meursault is tired. He has not slept well. He is offered dinner, but is not hungry. He accepts coffee. However, he mentions that he is very fond of coffee with milk and drinks it gratefully. He wants a cigarette, but is not sure if it is appropriate to smoke in the presence of his mother's coffin. After thinking about it, he decides it does not really matter and offers the keeper a cigarette. They both smoke. This moment, drinking coffee and smoking a cigarette beside his mother's coffin, is one of the details that will later be used against Meursault in court. Society will interpret this as a sign of callousness, of a lack of proper grief, but from Meursault's perspective, it is simply what it is. He was tired. He was not hungry. He wanted coffee. He wanted a cigarette. He acted on those feelings honestly, without performing a grief that he was not, in that moment, actively experiencing. Soon, his mother's friends from the home begin to arrive to keep vigil. 10 of them come in total, mostly elderly women and men, moving silently through the bright room. Meursault observes them with extraordinary clarity. He notices every detail. The aprons the women wear, the way the strings are drawn tight around their waists so that their stomachs bulge. The men are thin and carry walking sticks. Their eyes are barely visible, hidden in deep nests of wrinkles. They sit down around the coffin, nodding their heads awkwardly at Meursault in what might be a greeting, though it is hard to tell. For a moment, Meursault has a strange, almost absurd sensation that these old people have come to sit in judgment on him. They stare at him silently, nodding their heads, and there is something unnerving about it, something that feels evaluative, as if they are assessing him and finding him somehow lacking. This impression is not entirely wrong. Throughout the night, and indeed throughout the trial that will come later in the story, Meursault is judged not just for what he does, but for what he fails to do, for what he fails to feel. The old people around the coffin represent, in a small way, the judgment of society, the expectation that a proper son should be weeping, should be devastated, should be performing his grief in recognizable and acceptable ways. One of the women in the group is sobbing steadily and quietly. She cannot seem to stop. The keeper eventually explains that she was deeply devoted to Meursault's mother, that his mother was her only friend in the world, and that now she feels entirely alone. Meursault listens to this and says nothing. He wanted the woman to stop crying, but he could not bring himself to say anything to her. He simply waited for the sobbing to subside on its own, which eventually it did. The night is long and uncomfortable. Meursault is physically exhausted. His legs ache. His eyes are heavy. The silence of the old people around him begins to grate on his nerves. The only sounds are occasional strange wheezing noises, which he eventually realizes are the sound of the old men sucking at the insides of their cheeks, a habit they seem unaware of, completely absorbed as they are in their own thoughts. At one point, Meursault falls asleep, and when he wakes, one of the old men is staring directly at him, as if he had been watching and waiting for him to open his eyes. Then Meursault falls asleep again. This night of vigil is described with a kind of dreamlike quality. The bright light, the silent old figures, the strange sounds, the coffee and cigarettes, the aching tiredness. It all blends together into something that feels both hyperreal and slightly unreal at the same time. Meursault is present physically, but emotionally he is somewhere else, or perhaps more accurately, he is simply himself, experiencing the night as he experiences everything, without the overlay of conventional emotional performance. The morning and the preparation for the funeral. Dawn arrives gradually. One of the old men wakes with a fit of coughing, spitting into a large handkerchief loudly and repeatedly. This wakes the others. The keeper tells them it is time to go. The old people stand, their faces pale and gray after the long, uncomfortable night. And then, to Meursault's surprise, each one of them shakes his hand. It is a quiet, unexpected gesture of connection. These people who have spent the whole night with him without exchanging a single word have created, through that shared silent experience, a kind of bond with him, a wordless intimacy. Meursault is exhausted. The keeper takes him to his room to freshen up and gives him more coffee, which helps. When Meursault goes outside, the sun is already up. The sky above the hills is streaked red. A morning breeze carries the smell of salt from the sea. The Meursault thinks promises to be beautiful, and then he thinks something that perfectly captures who he is. He looks at the lovely countryside and thinks what a pleasant walk it would have been if it had not been for his mother's death. This is not a cruel thought. It is simply an honest one. The beauty of the morning is there, regardless of the death. Meursault notices it. He does not pretend it isn't there just because he is supposed to be grieving. He waits in the courtyard under a tree, smelling the cool earth, watching the sky lighten. He thinks about his colleagues at the office. At this hour, they would be waking up, getting ready for work. He has always found this the worst hour of the day. The warden eventually comes to get him, brings him to sign some paperwork, and then breaks the news that the undertaker's men have arrived and are ready to screw down the coffin. He asks if Meursault wants to see his mother one last time. Again, Meursault says, no. The warden makes the arrangements by telephone and then informs Meursault about who will be attending the funeral, because it is a rule of the home that residents cannot attend funerals to spare their emotional well-being. Only the warden, the nurse on duty, and Meursault himself will be going. However, there is one exception. An old man named Thomas Perez has been given special permission to attend. The warden explains Perez's story with a kind of gentle affection. Perez and Meursault's mother had become almost inseparable in recent months. They would take long evening walks together, accompanied by a nurse. The other residents teased Perez about it, joking that Meursault's mother was his fiancée and asking when they were going to get married. Perez would laugh it off, but it was clearly a genuine and tender friendship. Now, with her gone, Perez is devastated. The warden could not bring himself to refuse the old man's request to attend the funeral. However, on medical advice, Perez was not allowed to sit up through the night with a body that would have been too much for him. This story of Perez and Meursault's mother is quietly moving. It shows that his mother had a life at the home, real friendships, real connections, real warmth. She was not simply waiting to die. She had built something for herself in her final years, and Perez, who barely appears in this chapter as a physical presence, will become one of its most emotionally significant figures. The funeral procession. The funeral procession assembles outside the mortuary. The priest from the nearby village has arrived, accompanied by 2 young assistants, one of whom carries a censer, a small vessel for burning incense. The priest adjusts the silver chain of the censer with care, then greets Meursault, addressing him as my son. 4 men in black have screwed down the coffin lid. The hearse, black and polished, and the oblong waits outside. Meursault observes that it reminds him of the pen trays in his office. This detail is characteristic. He compares the hearse, that most solemn of vehicles, to something utterly ordinary from his daily working life. It is not disrespectful. Exactly. It is simply the way his mind works, grounding everything in the concrete and the familiar. Old Perez stands near the hearse, looking constrained and bashful. He is described in careful physical detail. His wide-brimmed felt hat, his trousers that bunch up over his shoes, his black tie that is too small for his high collar. His nose is large and pimply. His lips are trembling, but what strikes Meursault most are his ears, large and red, standing out against the pallor of his cheeks, framed by wisps of white hair. This description of Perez is one of the most compassionate in the chapter. Meursault does not mock him. He simply describes him with precise clarity, and in that precision, there is something tender, the way the old man's physical appearance speaks to his emotional state. The trembling lips, the ears flushed red with emotion and effort and heat. The procession sets off. The sun is already blazing. Meursault, wearing his dark suit, feels the heat pressing against his back. He has nuha, and the sun beats down directly on his head. He tries to fan himself with his handkerchief. The procession moves through the landscape, long rows of cypress trees, red earth, vivid patches of green, isolated houses in the distance. Meursault looks at this scenery and thinks he can understand why his mother loved the evenings here. The landscape has a kind of melancholy beauty in the cool of the evening, but in the full morning glare, it feels harsh and inhuman and discouraging. Perez, with his slight limp, struggles to keep up. The hearse moves at a steady pace, and the old man falls farther and farther behind. But he is determined to be there. He knows the area well, and he keeps cutting across the fields through shortcuts, rejoining the procession at different points, then falling behind again. Meursault watches this for a while, this old man's relentless effort to follow his lost friend's coffin. And then, as the heat and exhaustion overwhelm him, he loses interest and simply focuses on putting one foot in front of the other. The heat is extraordinary. The road becomes soft with tar in places, and the feet sink into it slightly with each step, leaving dark gashes. The smells are intense: leather, horse dung. From the hearse, wafts of incense smoke. Meursault's head is throbbing. His thoughts are blurring. He is barely holding himself together. One of the undertaker's men walking beside him makes conversation. He complains about the heat, asks if it is Meursault's mother they are burying, asks her age. Meursault answers briefly. He doesn't actually know exactly how old she was. She was getting on, he says. The man falls silent after that. The nurse, walking near Meursault, offers a small piece of practical wisdom during the walk. She warns him that if he walks too slowly, he risks heat stroke. But if he walks too fast, he will sweat and then catch a chill from the cold air inside the church. There is no perfect pace, she suggests. Either way, he is in for trouble. This small observation could be read as a kind of dark joke about life in general. There is no safe path, no way to avoid discomfort and consequence entirely. The end of the funeral and the return to Algiers. The funeral itself passes quickly in Meursault's memory. He cannot recall many specific details. The heat and exhaustion have blurred everything together. He remembers fragments: the church, the villagers watching from the street, red geraniums on graves, and then the moment that lingers most powerfully in his memory, Perez collapsing. The old man simply crumples, like a rag doll, overcome by grief and exhaustion and the relentless heat. He had pushed himself beyond his limits to follow the woman he cared about to her final resting place. Meursault remembers the red-brown earth falling on the coffin, the bits of white roots mixed into the soil, the voices of the people around him. And then, with a feeling that is almost like relief, the wait outside a cafe for the bus back to Algiers, the sound of the engine starting, and the moment the bus entered the first lit streets of the city. And at that moment, Meursault feels a small, genuine thrill of pleasure. He is back. He is almost home. He can go to bed and sleep for 12 hours. This ending is deliberately understated and quietly shocking. After 2 days in which his mother has been buried, Meursault's dominant feeling upon returning to the city is not grief or exhaustion or reflection. It is the simple, uncomplicated pleasure of anticipating sleep and the return to normalcy. He is not pretending to feel more than he does. He is not performing sadness for the benefit of an invisible audience. He simply feels what he feels and what he feels. Hachi, this moment is relief and the ordinary comfort of coming home. Major themes introduced in Chapter 1. Emotional detachment and honesty. The most striking quality of this chapter and of Meursault as a narrator is his emotional honesty. He does not pretend to grieve in the way society expects him to. He observes the world with great clarity and describes it with great precision, but he does not perform feelings he does not have. This is not the same as having no feelings. He notices beauty. He is moved by the countryside. He feels physical discomfort and small pleasures, but he does not manufacture grief, and this will become the central source of conflict in the story that follows. The absurdity of social rituals throughout the chapter. Death is surrounded by rituals. The vigil, the coffin, the hearse, the procession, the church service, the burial. Meursault participates in all of these rituals, but he does not find them particularly meaningful. He notes them, observes them, moves through them. The keeper's observation that in this hot climate there is barely time to register that someone is dead before the funeral is already happening captures something important, that these rituals are, in a sense, performances, and the timing and nature of them are shaped by practical and social concerns as much as by genuine feeling. The indifference of the physical world. The heat is relentless throughout this chapter. The sun beats down without mercy. The landscape shimmers and presses. The physical world does not adjust itself to accommodate human grief. It simply continues hot, bright, indifferent. This indifference of the natural world mirrors, in some ways, Meursault's own emotional state, and it anticipates the broader philosophical theme of the novel, that the universe is fundamentally indifferent to human life and human suffering. The judgment of society. Even in this first chapter, Meursault is being judged. The warden seems to subtly blame him for having placed his mother in the home. The old residents seem to evaluate him silently through the night. The rituals of mourning are designed, in part, to demonstrate grief publicly, to show the world that a death has mattered, that a person is missed. Meursault moves through these rituals without performing the expected emotions, and this will eventually destroy him. Not because he is a bad person, but because society cannot tolerate someone who refuses to pretend. The figure of Pérez. Old Pérez is one of the most emotionally significant figures in the chapter, precisely because he is the opposite of Meursault in one important way. He feels deeply, and he shows it. He cannot keep up with the procession, but he refuses to give up. He collapses from grief and effort. His tears cannot even flow properly because of the wrinkles in his face. They spread out and pool and dry. He is a figure of genuine, openly displayed human mourning, and his presence alongside Meursault makes the contrast between performed grief and Meursault's quiet non-performance all the more striking. Conclusion. Chapter 1 of this novel is a masterpiece of economical, precise, quietly devastating writing. In just a few thousand words, it establishes a world, a voice, and a central human question that will drive the entire story. What does it mean to feel the right things at the right time, and what happens to a person who refuses or is simply unable to perform the emotions that society demands? Meursault is not a monster. He is not cruel or cold in any aggressive sense. He's simply honest in a way that the world finds deeply uncomfortable. He notices the heat, the coffee, the countryside, the old people's faces, the sound of the tarred road under his feet. He does not notice, or at least does not express, the conventional grief that everyone around him expects. And in that gap between what is expected and what is actually felt, or at least what is actually expressed, lies the heart of this remarkable story. Chapter 2. Introduction. If the first chapter of this story introduced us to Meursault as a man who could not grieve in the expected way at his mother's funeral, then this second chapter shows us something equally revealing: what he does immediately after. How does a man spend the day after burying his mother? For Meursault, the answer is simple and completely honest. He goes swimming, meets a woman, takes her to a comedy film, brings her home, and then spends the following Sunday eating chocolate and watching people from his balcony window. To most readers, this behavior will feel shocking, even offensive. And that is precisely the point. Society has very clear rules about how long a person should grieve, how they should behave in the days following a death, what activities are appropriate and which are not. Meursault does not follow these rules. not because he is cruel or deliberately rebellious, but because he simply does what feels natural to him in each moment, without filtering his behavior through the lens of what others might think or expect. This chapter is shorter than the first, but it is just as rich in meaning. It deepens our understanding of Meursault as a character, introduces an important new person in his life, and continues to build the philosophical foundation of the entire story. A world in which a man's inability to perform conventional emotions will ultimately cost him everything. Waking up on Saturday morning. The chapter opens with Meursault waking up the morning after the funeral. His first thought, upon regaining consciousness, is a practical one. He suddenly realizes that today is Saturday. He had not thought about this when he asked his employer for 2 days of leave. Now, lying in bed, it strikes him why his employer had looked so annoyed when he made the request by taking Thursday and Friday off for the funeral. And with Saturday and Sunday coming immediately after, Meursault has effectively given himself 4 consecutive days away from work. His employer had seen this clearly at the time, even though Meursault reflects on this briefly and with characteristic fairness. He acknowledges that he can see his employer's point. 4 days in a row is a lot. At the same time, he notes it was not his fault that his mother's funeral happened when it did. He would have had Saturday and Sunday off regardless. He is not complaining or making excuses. He is simply thinking through the logic of the situation with the same calm, analytical quality that he brings to everything. This opening moment is very characteristic of Meursault. He has just buried his mother. Most people, waking the morning after such an event, would wake with a heavy heart, the grief pressing down on them before they were even fully conscious. Meursault wakes thinking about his work schedule. This is not because he did not care about his mother. It is simply because his mind works in a particular way grounded in the immediate, the practical, the concrete. Abstract emotions do not dominate his waking thoughts the way they might for others. He also notes in this opening paragraph that he was genuinely exhausted by the previous day's experiences. The long walk in the brutal heat, the night of vigil, the funeral procession, all of it had drained him physically. He is not pretending the experience was easy or comfortable. He is simply not drowning in grief. The decision to go swimming getting out of bed is an effort. Meursault is tired, and his body is still recovering. While shaving, a small, ordinary, domestic detail that grounds us immediately in everyday reality, he thinks about how to spend the morning. He decides that the swim would do him good. This is a practical decision. He is physically tired. Exercise and fresh water will help him recover. He does not agonize over whether it is appropriate to go swimming the day after burying his mother. He simply decides that it would be good for him, and he goes. He catches a streetcar down to the harbor. It is a familiar journey, the kind of thing he has done many times before. The swimming pool near the harbor is full of young people enjoying their Saturday. Meursault notes that it is quite like old times, an ordinary, pleasant scene that he slides into easily and without discomfort. The phrase, quite like old times, is worth pausing over. Meursault is returning to his normal life. His mother is buried. He is going swimming, and it feels, to him, perfectly natural. Not because he has no feelings about his mother's death, but because this is simply who he is. He lives in the present. He does not linger in the past or dread the future. He is here, now, at the swimming pool, and it is a pleasant Saturday morning. The encounter with Marie. At the swimming pool, Meursault notices someone he recognizes. A young woman named Marie. She used to work as a typist at his office, though only for a short time. Meursault recalls that he had been attracted to her back then, and that he believes she liked him too, but she left the job before anything developed between them. Their reunion at the swimming pool is described with a light, almost casual sensuality. Meursault helps her climb up onto a floating raft, and in doing so, lets his hand brush across her. He notices this and notes it without embarrassment or self-consciousness. Then Marie lies flat on the raft, while he treads water beside it. She turns to look at him, her hair falling over her eyes, laughing. He climbs up onto the raft beside her. The air is warm. He rests his head in her lap, and she allows it. He lies there looking up at the blue and gold sky, feeling her breathing gently beneath his head. They stay like this for about half an hour, half asleep, comfortable and warm. When the sun becomes too intense, they dive off and swim side by side, his arm around her waist. she is still laughing. When they dry off at the edge of the pool, she teases him, saying she is more tan than he is. He asks if she will come to the cinema with him that evening. She agrees on the condition that he takes her to a particular comedy that everyone has been talking about, one featuring a popular comedian of the time. This scene is written with a kind of innocent, physical pleasure that is very characteristic of how Meursault experiences the world. He is not in love with Marie, exactly, or at least, not yet. He is attracted to her. He enjoys her company. He enjoys the warmth and the water and the simple physical pleasure of the afternoon. He is present in his body in a way that most people are not aware of: temperature, sensation, light, movement. These physical details are not incidental to who he is. They are central. Meursault lives, above all, through his senses. The black tie and the reaction to his mother's death. After they have dressed and are ready to leave, Marie notices something. She sees that Meursault is wearing a black tie, the mourning tie he had borrowed from his friend before the funeral. She asks if he is in mourning. He tells her that his mother has died. She asks when, and he says, yesterday. Marie's reaction is understated but telling. She says nothing, but Meursault notices that she seems to pull away slightly, just a small physical withdrawal, a barely perceptible increase in distance. She does not make a scene. She does not ask further questions. But she is clearly affected by this information, perhaps unsettled by the combination of what they have just been doing: the raft, the swimming, the easy physical intimacy, and the fact that this man's mother was buried only the day before. Meursault notices her reaction and thinks about explaining that it was not his fault, using the same phrase he had used with his employer. But he stops himself. He remembers that when he said it to his employer it sounded foolish, and so he keeps quiet this time. He then adds a small, quiet, self-aware observation that somehow, even if it is not your fault, you cannot help feeling a little guilty. This is one of the rare moments in the chapter where Meursault acknowledges something like an uncomfortable emotion. Not grief, exactly, but a kind of vague social guilt, the awareness that he is doing something the world considers wrong, even if he cannot fully understand why. This brief moment matters. It shows us that Meursault is not entirely oblivious to social expectations. He knows that going swimming the day after his mother's funeral is not what people do. He knows that asking a woman to the cinema that same evening is not conventional grieving behavior. He registers the discomfort of others. He simply does not change his behavior in response to it. By the evening, he notes Marie has forgotten all about it. They go to the film together. It is funny in part, though some of it is, Meursault thinks, simply stupid. In the cinema, Marie presses her leg against his, and he responds with easy, uncomplicated physical affection. Toward the end of the film, he kisses her, though he acknowledges it is rather clumsy. Afterwards, she comes back with him to his apartment. Sunday morning, alone. The next morning, Meursault wakes to find that Marie has already left. She had mentioned the night before that she had to be at her aunt's early in the morning, and she hath kept to this. The apartment is empty. Meursault notes that it is Sunday, and this puts him off. He has never liked Sundays. This is a revealing detail. Sundays, in the world of this story, are days of enforced leisure. Days when the normal routines of work and purpose are suspended and people are left to fill the time themselves. For someone like Meursault, who finds meaning in the immediate and the concrete, a day with no structure or purpose is not restful. It is mildly oppressive. He turns his head and lies in bed, lazily breathing in the smell of salt water that Marie's hair has left on the pillow. There is something gentle and slightly melancholy about this detail. He is alone, but he is not dramatically lonely. He is simply aware of her absence in a sensory way. The smell on the pillow where she slept. He sleeps again until 10 o'clock. After waking, he stays in bed until noon, smoking cigarettes. He decides not to go to his usual restaurant for lunch, because he knows the people there will ask him questions about the funeral, and he dislikes being questioned, so he fries some eggs in a pan and eats them directly from it. He has no bread, he ran out, and cannot be bothered going down to buy more. This tiny detail is characteristic. He does without, rather than making the effort of a small, unnecessary errand. After lunch, he wanders around his apartment. He reflects on the apartment itself, noting that it suited him and his mother well enough. when they lived there together. But now that he is alone, it feels too big. He has already dealt with this in a practical way, moving the dining table into his bedroom so that he uses only one room. The rest of the flat he ignores. He describes the furniture of his room: the brass bed, the dressing table, cane chairs with sagging seats, a wardrobe with a mirror that has lost its shine. It is a modest, functional space. He does not seem to mind it. The old newspaper and the balcony, with nothing particular to do, and the afternoon stretching out emptily in front of him. Meursault picks up an old newspaper from the floor and reads it. He finds an advertisement for a brand of health salts and cuts it out, pasting it into an album. He keeps 4 things that amuse him in the papers. This is a small and oddly charming detail. Meursault has a habit of cutting out things from newspapers that he finds interesting or funny and keeping them in a scrapbook. It is a very ordinary human hobby, and it makes him suddenly feel more familiar and less alien than he sometimes seems. After this, he washes his hands and, as a last resort for filling the empty afternoon, goes out onto his balcony. His bedroom overlooks the main street of his neighborhood, and from the balcony he can observe the life of the street below. What follows is one of the most beautiful and quietly observed passages in the entire chapter. A long, careful description of an ordinary Sunday afternoon in an ordinary neighborhood, seen through Meursault's extraordinarily clear and precise eyes. Watching the street, a portrait of Sunday. First comes a family on their Sunday afternoon walk. 2 small boys in sailor suits, their trousers barely reaching their knees, looking stiff and uncomfortable in their Sunday best. A little girl behind them, with a large pink bow in her hair and shiny black shoes. Behind the children, their mother, an enormously large woman in a brown silk dress. And behind her, their father, a small, neat, well-dressed man with a straw hat, a walking stick, and a decorative bow tie. Meursault observes this family with quiet, almost anthropological attention. He knows the father by sight, and seeing him standing beside his large wife, he understands for the first time why people say he came from a good family and married below his station. This is a sharp, slightly cruel social observation, but it is delivered without malice. Meursault is simply noting what he sees and what it means. Next come a group of young men, local youths, dressed in their finest, with oiled hair, tight-waisted coats, red ties, and square-toed shoes. They are heading to one of the big cinemas in the center of town, and they are already excited, talking loudly and laughing as they head for the streetcar stop. Meursault turns his own chair around to face outward, copying the tobacconist's posture, as it is more comfortable that way. He smokes a couple of cigarettes. He goes inside briefly, gets a piece of chocolate, and brings it back to the window to eat while continuing to watch. The sky clouds over for a while, threatening rain, but then gradually clears. The air feels humid and slightly heavy. He watches the sky for a long time. At 5 in the afternoon, the noise of the streetcars changes. They are coming back from a football match at the local stadium, packed with supporters. Even the back platforms are crowded, with people standing on the steps. Then another streetcar brings back the players themselves, each carrying a small bag. They are singing their team song loudly and cheerfully. One of the players looks up at Meursault on his balcony and shouts up that they won. Meursault waves and calls back his congratulations. It is a small, spontaneous exchange between strangers, brief and warm. As evening begins, the street fills up again. People are returning from their Sunday outings. Meursault spots the same neat little father and his large wife among the returning crowd. Children trail tiredly behind their parents, whimpering with exhaustion. Then the cinemas release their audiences first. Those from the local houses, their movements slightly exaggerated and energetic from watching action films. Then, a little later, those returning from the cinemas in the town center, calmer more subdued, though a few are still laughing quietly. Then, all at once, the street lamps come on, all of them simultaneously. Their brightness makes the early stars in the darkening sky look pale by comparison. Meursault's eyes are tired from watching. He notices small details, pools of light on the pavement, the passing of a streetcar that briefly illuminates a girl's hair, or a smile, or a silver bracelet on someone's wrist. Meursault sees. He sees with extraordinary clarity and detail. He notices the fat woman's brown silk dress, the father's butterfly top, the oiled hair of the young men, the silver bangle catching the lamplight. He is not a man who is closed off from the world. He is, in fact, one of the most observant people in the story. He absorbs the world through his senses with an intensity and precision that most people never achieve. What he does not do is interpret the world through a conventional emotional filter. He does not look at the tired children and feel a particular sentimental tenderness. He does not look at the dapper father and the large wife and feel pity or contempt. He simply notes what he sees and what it implies. He does not look at the girls laughing under the lamps and feel a particular longing. He watches and he records and he is present. But he is present without the overlay of performed emotion. There is something almost meditative about this scene. A man sitting alone at his window on a Sunday evening, watching the life of the street below, completely absorbed in the simple act of observation. It is, in its quiet way, one of the most peaceful passages in the chapter. Meursault is not suffering. He is not lost in grief or guilt or self-reproach. He is simply watching. And in watching, he is alive. Dinner and the final thought. Eventually, the aching in his neck from leaning over the balcony railing for so long reminds him that he should eat. He goes downstairs, buys bread and spaghetti, comes back up, cooks his meal, and eats it standing up. He considers smoking a cigarette at the window after eating, but the night has turned cool, so he closes the window instead. As he passes the mirror in his room, he catches a brief glimpse of his reflection, or rather, of the corner of his table with a small spirit lamp and some pieces of bread. It is a domestic, ordinary hymn, and this glance at the mirror prompts his final thought, which closes the chapter. He reflects that somehow, once again, he has got through a Sunday, that his mother is now buried, and that tomorrow he will go back to work as usual. And then the final sentence, one of the most quietly devastating lines in the chapter. Really, nothing in my life had changed. The meaning of the final sentence. This sentence deserves careful attention, because it is so much more complex than it first appears. On one level, it is literally true. Meursault's mother had been living in the elderly care home for 3 years. He rarely visited. She was not a daily presence in his life. The practical structure of his days, going to work, eating at Sintès, spending weekends at the pool or on the balcony, remains exactly as it was before. In a purely practical sense, nothing has changed. But on another level, everything has changed. His mother is dead. He is now, in the most fundamental sense, alone in the world, without parents, without family. The flat that he lives in is now entirely his. The relationship he had with his mother, however distant and quiet, is over. Death is irreversible. And yet Meursault's response to this is a flat, simple observation. Nothing has changed. This is not callousness. Or rather, it is not only callousness. It is something more unsettling. A kind of radical honesty about the way the world actually works. Life does go on. Work does resume. The street below will be full of people tomorrow and the day after. The universe does not pause to mourn, and Meursault, who has always been in alignment with the universe's own indifference, simply notices this truth and states it. In saying that nothing has changed, Meursault is not saying that his mother's death meant nothing. He is saying something more philosophical and more difficult. That the external structure of existence continues regardless of loss, regardless of grief, regardless of death. The sun still rises. The streetcars still run. People still walk to the cinema. And girls still laugh under the lamps. And Meursault still goes to work on Monday. The character of Marie Cardona, introduced in this chapter, is one of the most important characters in the entire story. She is warm, physical, laughing, alive. She enjoys life in a direct and uncomplicated way that is, in some respects, not entirely different from Meursault's own approach. She does not seem to require deep emotional declarations from him. She is comfortable with physical closeness, with laughter, with the simple pleasures of a day at the pool or an evening at the cinema. And yet, she too is not entirely free from social expectations. When she learns that Meursault's mother died yesterday, she pulls away slightly. She cannot help it. The information changes something for her, at least momentarily, but she recovers quickly, and by the evening it is forgotten. She is not a judgmental person. She simply operates within the emotional rules of her world, as most people do. Marie will become increasingly important as the story progresses. Her relationship with Meursault will be used, like so many things in his life, as evidence against him, evidence of his abnormality, his lack of proper feeling, his failure to behave like a person who has just lost his mother. But in this chapter, she simply appears as a warm and pleasant presence, someone who brings physical joy and easy companionship into Meursault's quiet and unremarkable life. The apartment and its significance. The description of Meursault's apartment in this chapter is brief but revealing. He has already adapted it to his solitary life, moving the dining table into his bedroom so that he only uses one room, leaving the rest of the flat unused and uncared for. This is a very practical response to changed circumstances, but it is also a quietly telling one. The apartment is described as having been a good size for 2 people. Now that Meursault is alone, it is too large. Rather than filling the space, decorating it, using the empty rooms for some purpose, asserting his presence throughout the flat, he simply contracts his life into a single room and ignores everything else. He does not expand to fill the available space. He retreats into the minimum he needs. This is, in miniature, a portrait of how Meursault approaches life in general. He takes what he needs. He does not perform abundance or ambition. He lives within a carefully bounded, modest, sensory existence. 1 room, a bed, a table, cigarettes, coffee, the window, and what lies beyond it. Themes developed in Chapter 2. The continuation of life after death. The central implicit theme of this chapter is the continuation of ordinary life in the wake of death. Meursault swims, goes to the cinema, makes love, eats eggs, watches the street. The world continues. He continues. And he does not feel guilty about this continuation, or rather, he feels only a vague, uncertain guilt that he cannot quite articulate or fully believe in. Sensory experience as a form of being Meursault is intensely alive to physical sensation, the warmth of the air, the feel of the water. Marie's leg against his in the cinema, the smell of her hair on the pillow, the taste of chocolate, the ache in his neck from leaning on the balcony. He experiences the world primarily through his senses, not through abstract emotions or social performances. This is not a deficiency. It is a different, and in some ways, more honest way of being alive. The weight of Sunday appears in this chapter as a kind of minor enemy, a day of unstructured time that Meursault finds mildly oppressive. Without the routine of work, without Marie, without a specific purpose, the day stretches uncomfortably. He feels it as best he can, the newspaper, the chocolate, the balcony. But there is a slight undertone of restlessness to the whole afternoon, a sense of someone waiting for the day to be over so that ordinary life can resume. Observation without judgment. The long balcony scene is a perfect illustration of Meursault's relationship to the world. He watches everything with intense clarity and almost no emotional investment. He notices the fat woman and the dapper husband, the young men with their oiled hair, the girls laughing, the cat crossing the empty street at dusk. He records all of this with the careful attention of a naturalist or a painter, someone whose primary relationship with the world is one of seeing, not of feeling or judging. The social cost of honesty. This chapter shows us, more clearly than the first, what it costs Meursault to be the kind of person he is. He goes swimming the day after the funeral and people pull away slightly. He takes a woman to the cinema and she briefly shrinks from him. He does nothing to hide what he is doing or to justify it publicly. And the world notices. And the world is uncomfortable. This discomfort will grow slowly and inexorably into something far more dangerous. Conclusion. Chapter 2 is, on the surface, a quiet chapter. Nothing dramatic happens. A man goes swimming, meets a woman, goes to the cinema, spends a Sunday alone at his window. But beneath this surface simplicity lies a profound portrait of a person who exists in a fundamentally different relationship to the world than those around him. Meursault is not broken. He is not a monster. He's, not even in any conventional sense, a bad person. He is honest, observant, gentle in his way, capable of physical pleasure and simple human warmth. He does not lie. He does not pretend. He does not perform emotions. He does not feel. But the world is not built for people like Meursault. The world requires performance. It requires that grief be displayed, that conventions be followed, that the death of a mother be met with certain behaviors and not others. And Meursault, who cannot or will not perform these things, is already, without knowing it, without intending it, setting himself on a course toward catastrophe. The final line of the chapter, that nothing in his life has changed, is not a statement of triumph or indifference. It is simply a fact, delivered in Meursault's characteristic flat and honest voice. And it is, in its quiet way, one of the most haunting lines in the entire story. Chapter 3. Introduction. Chapter 3 of this remarkable story marks an important turning point in the narrative. While the first 2 chapters focused primarily on Meursault's inner world, his emotional detachment, his sensory awareness, his quiet and honest relationship with the world around him, this 3rd chapter begins to introduce the external forces and characters that will ultimately shape his fate. Most significantly, this chapter introduces 2 neighbors who will both play important roles in the story ahead. The first is old Salamano, an elderly man whose relationship with his dog is one of the most quietly devastating portraits of loneliness and dependency in the entire novel. The second is Raymond, a man of questionable character and profession, whose involvement with Meursault will have consequences that neither of them can foresee. The chapter also shows us Meursault returning to the ordinary rhythms of his working life back at the office, eating at his usual restaurant, navigating the small pleasures and minor irritations of an ordinary weekday. On the surface, very little happens, and yet, by the end of the chapter, something has shifted. A friendship has been formed, or at least an alliance, and a letter has been written that will set in motion a chain of events with profound consequences. Back at the office. The chapter opens on a Monday morning, Meursault's first day back at work after his mother's funeral. The office is busy. There is a pile of bills of lading waiting on his desk, and he has to work his way through all of them. But before the work itself is described, Meursault notes something about his employer's mood. The employer is in good spirits. He asks Meursault if he is not too tired, which is a gesture towards sympathy, a small acknowledgement of what Meursault has just been through. He then asks how old Meursault's mother was. Meursault thinks about this for a moment and says approximately 60, because he does not want to give the wrong answer. He genuinely does not know exactly how old she was. This small detail, his uncertainty about his own mother's age, is one of those quiet, devastating observations that the story specializes in. Most sons know their mother's age. Meursault does not. He was not close to her in that way. He knows she was getting on in years, and he gives a rough estimate, rounding to a comfortable number. The employer, upon hearing this, looks relieved. Meursault cannot understand why. Perhaps 60 seems like a reasonably good age. Not too young, not a tragic early death. Perhaps the employer feels better knowing that death was not premature. Whatever the reason, he seems satisfied and considers the matter closed. And Meursault moves on. He washes his hands before leaving for lunch, a small ritual he always enjoys at midday, though he finds it less pleasant in the evening when the shared roller towel is soaked through from a day of use. He once brought his problem to his employer's attention, and the employer agreed it was unfortunate, though he considered it only a minor detail. Meursault accepted this response without further argument. This opening scene is characteristic in its attention to small, practical details. The hand-washing, the wet towel, the employer's smiley relieved expression. These are the kinds of things Meursault notices and records. He is not dwelling on grief. He is not replaying the funeral in his mind. He is back at work, doing his job, washing his hands, and observing the small texture of his daily life with the same precise and dispassionate attention he brings to everything. Lunchtime adventure with Emmanuel. At 12:30, slightly later than usual, Meursault leaves the office with a colleague named Emmanuel, who works in the forwarding department. Their building faces the sea, and they pause on the steps to look out at the harbor. The sun is already intensely hot. This detail, the heat, always the heat, continues to press through the chapter as it has through all the others. A large truck comes rattling past, noisy with the clanking of chains and the banging of its engine. Emmanuel, in a spontaneous burst of youthful energy, suggests they try to jump aboard, and Meursault, without hesitation or overthinking, agrees. They run for it. The truck is already moving fast, and they have to sprint along the waterfront to catch up, weaving through cranes and winches and the dark hulls of ships. The heat and the noise are overwhelming. Meursault says he feels half-dazed by it all, but he catches up first, makes the jump, lands safely, and reaches back to help Emmanuel scramble up beside him. Both of them are breathless and laughing. Emmanuel shouts in his ear that they have made it. This small scene is one of the most spontaneously joyful moments in the chapter. There is something boyish and uncomplicated about it. Two men in their work clothes chasing a truck in the midday heat for no particular reason, except that it seemed like a good idea at the time. Meursault does not plan it, does not weigh it up, does not consider whether it is appropriate behavior for a man who buried his mother just 3 days ago. He simply runs and jumps, because Emmanuel suggested it and because it seemed fun. By the time they arrive at Céleste's restaurant, they are dripping with sweat. Céleste, the restaurant owner, a familiar and reassuring presence in Meursault's life, is at his usual spot by the entrance, his large stomach pushing out against his apron, his white mustache prominent. He sees Meursault and offers his sympathy, asking if he's not feeling too badly. Meursault says no, but he is extremely hungry. He eats quickly and has coffee afterwards. He has also drunk a glass of wine too many, so when he gets back to his apartment, he takes a short nap before returning to the office for the afternoon. The afternoon and the journey home. The afternoon at the office is stifling. The heat has made the building uncomfortable, and Meursault is kept busy all afternoon. When the working day ends, it is a relief to step outside and walk slowly along the waterfront in the cooler evening air. The sky has turned green, one of those vivid, slightly unreal colors that appear at dusk in hot climates. It is pleasant to be outdoors after the stuffy office. Meursault notes this pleasure simply and directly, without embellishment. He goes straight home because he has potatoes to boil. This small domestic detail, the potatoes, grounds us again in the ordinary texture of his life. He is a man who cooks his own meals, who thinks about practical necessities, who goes home when he has something to do there. There is nothing dramatic about any of this. It is simply Tuesday evening, and he needs to cook dinner. Salamano and his dog. In the dark hallway of his building, Meursault almost walks into one of his neighbors, an old man named Salamano, and with Salamano, as always, is his dog. The description of Salamano and his dog is one of the most memorable passages in the chapter, and indeed one of the most quietly extraordinary passages in the entire story. The two of them have been together for 8 years. The dog is a spaniel, and it is not a handsome animal. It suffers from a skin disease, possibly mange, and has lost most of its hair. Its body is covered in reddish-brown scabs. It is, by any conventional standard, an ugly and pitiable creature. But here is what Meursault knows with his characteristic, precise, and unsentimental eye. Through 8 years of living together in a single, small room, the man and the dog have come to resemble each other. Salamano himself has thin, patchy hair and reddish blotches on his face, just like the dog's scabby skin. And the dog has adopted something of its master's odd, hunched posture. It always walks with its muzzle stretched forward and its nose to the ground in a way that mirrors the old man's own stooped way of moving. They look alike. They have absorbed each other's physical characteristics through years of proximity. And yet, And this is the detail that gives the description its particular power. They detest each other twice a day, at 11 in the morning and 6 in the evening. Salamano takes the dog for a walk. This walk has not varied in 8 years. On the street, the dog constantly pulls ahead, straining at the leash until the old man loses his footing and nearly falls. Then Salamano beats the dog and shouts at it. The dog cowers and falls behind. Then it is the old man's turn to drag the dog forward. And then, after a short while, the dog forgets and starts pulling again, and the cycle repeats. When the dog wants to stop at a lamppost, the old man refuses and drags it on, and the dog, unable to stop, leaves a trail of drops on the pavement. If it does the same thing inside the apartment, it gets beaten again. This has been going on for 8 years. The regular customers at Sintès restaurants say it is a crying shame and that something should be done. But Meursault characteristically is not so sure. Can one really say with certainty that it is a shame? He is not defending cruelty. He is simply noting that the relationship between the two is more complex than it appears. They have been together for 8 years. They have shaped each other. There is something binding them that goes beyond simple affection or simple cruelty. When Meursault encounters them in the hallway, Salamano is berating the dog in a fury of muttered insults, calling it names, cursing it under his breath, and the dog is whimpering. Meursault says, "Good evening," but gets no response. He asks what the dog has done, and again gets nothing but more cursing. He cannot quite see clearly in the dark hallway, but it seems Salamano is adjusting something on the dog's collar. He raises his voice slightly, and the old man mumbles, without looking up, that the dog is always in the way. Then he hauls the resisting animal up the stairs, one step at a time. The portrait of Salamano and his dog is one of the novel's most poignant sketches. It is not a story of love, exactly, or at least not love as we usually understand it. It is something stranger and more honest, a portrait of two beings who have shaped each other through years of proximity and mutual dependency, who may not be capable of surviving without each other, even though their relationship is largely one of mutual irritation and cruelty. It is a compressed, sideways portrait of loneliness, the kind of loneliness that creates its own odd bonds, its own strange intimacy. The introduction of Raymond Sintès, just as Meursault is processing the scene with Salamano. Another neighbor arrives, a man who lives on the same floor. This is Raymond Sintès, and he will become one of the most important figures in this story. Meursault notes, with characteristic directness, that the general opinion of people in the building is that Raymond is a pimp. Raymond himself, when asked, says he works as a warehouseman. Whether this is true or not, Meursault does not venture to judge. What he does note is that Raymond is not popular in the neighborhood, and yet Raymond has always been friendly toward Meursault. He often stops for a word, sometimes comes to Meursault's room for a chat. And Meursault, who is a good listener, finds what Raymond says genuinely interesting. He has no particular reason to avoid the man, and so he does not. Physically, Raymond is described with the same precise attention Meursault gives to everything. He is short and thick. He has the flattened nose of someone who has been in many fights. He always dresses neatly, well turned out, spruced up. There is something slightly incongruous about this careful attention to his appearance, given his reputation and the roughness of his life. Raymond invites Meursault to share dinner. He has black pudding and wine. Meursault accepts, reasoning simply that this will save him from having to cook his own meal. He has no other particular motivation. He does not particularly want to spend the evening with Raymond, but he also has no strong reason not to. This is very typical of how Meursault makes decisions, not through strong desire or aversion, but through a kind of passive acceptance of whatever presents itself. Dinner in Raymond's room. Raymond's room is small, untidy, and lived in. A plaster angel hangs above the bed. On the opposite wall are photos of sporting champions and women without clothes. The bed is unmade and the room is generally dirty. Raymond lights a paraffin lamp and then, fumbling in his pocket, produces a grimy bandage which he wraps around his right hand. Meursault asks about it. Raymond explains that he has been in a fight. A man on a streetcar spoke to him challengingly, questioned his courage, and Raymond got off the streetcar and beat him badly enough to leave him bleeding on the ground. He tells this story with a kind of matter-of-fact pride. He is not one to look for trouble, he says, but he is short-tempered, and when someone questions his manhood, he cannot let it pass. Meursault listens to this without particular judgment. Raymond asks if Meursault thinks he was in the right. If the other man was asking for what he got, Meursault agrees simply that it looks that way. He is not endorsing violence. He is simply responding to the question put to him in the most honest and direct way he can. He does not moralize. He does not lecture Raymond about the rights and wrongs of street fighting. He listens and responds with his honest assessment. Raymond then says he has something he wants to ask Meursault's advice about, and this is connected to the fight. First, though, he wants to tell Meursault the full story. They sit down to eat, and Raymond begins. Raymond's story? The story Raymond tells is this. He was involved with a woman. He was essentially keeping her financially. He paid her rent, gave her money for food, bought her gifts. He gave her what he considered a reasonable and generous amount, but she was never satisfied. She complained constantly that she could not manage on what he gave her. He told her to get a part-time job to supplement her income, and she refused. Then he discovered she was being unfaithful to him, or at least that she was getting money from other sources. He found a lottery ticket in her bag that she could not account for. He found a pawn ticket for 2 bracelets he had never seen before. The evidence, to his mind, was clear. She was deceiving him, taking money from other men. When he confronted her, he gave her a beating. He says this with the same matter-of-fact tone he uses for everything else. He beat her until blood came, though he is careful to note that he had never really beaten her seriously before, only affectionately, he says. And the word is chilling in its He told her home truths, that she was a woman who only cared about one thing, that she was lucky to have him, that she would regret losing him. He is now finished with her, he says. But he does not feel that the punishment has been sufficient. He wants to hurt her more, not physically this time, but emotionally. And this is where he wants Meursault's help. Meursault listens to all of this without speaking. He has drunk a full bottle of wine by this point, and his head is slightly fuzzy. He borrows Raymond's cigarettes. Because he has run out of his own, he simply sits and listens, absorbing the story without editing it or responding to it emotionally. When Raymond asks what Meursault thinks, whether the woman really did him wrong, whether she should be punished, Meursault answers honestly, yes, it looks like she deceived him. Yes, he can understand Raymond wanting her to suffer for it. He cannot tell Raymond exactly what to do, because these situations are complicated, but he understands the impulse. It is important to note what Meursault does not do here. He does not ask whether Raymond's treatment of the woman was itself wrong. He does not challenge the idea that a man has the right to beat a woman who deceives him. He does not question Raymond's moral framework. He simply listens and responds to the questions put to him. This passive acceptance of Raymond's story, this failure to challenge or moralize, will have significant consequences later in the story. Tiaga y letter. Raymond's plan is to write the woman a letter, a sharp, cutting letter that will wound her emotionally and draw her back to him. Then, when she comes back, he will go to bed with her, and at the moment when she is fully invested and emotionally open, he will spit in her face and throw her out. This, he feels, will be a sufficient punishment. He has thought through various other options involving the police, having her officially registered as a prostitute, reaching out to contacts in the criminal underworld for suggestions, but none of these felt right. The letter is his plan. There is only one problem. He does not feel capable of writing the kind of letter that would be truly effective. He is not a man of words. He needs help. He asks Meursault to write it for him. Meursault agrees. He has no particular reason not to. He does not pause to consider whether he should involve himself in this situation. He does not think about where the letter might lead or what damage it might do. He simply agrees to help, as he might agree to help someone with any other practical task. Raymond clears the table, pushing aside the dishes, wiping the oilcloth carefully, and produces a sheet of paper, an envelope, a small red pen holder, and a square ink pot filled with purple ink. He mentions the woman's name, and Meursault realizes from the name that she is a Moorish woman, an Arab. Meursault writes the letter. He does not take great pains over it, but he wants to write something that will satisfy Raymond, and so he applies himself to the task with quiet competence. Raymond listens carefully as Meursault reads it back, nodding at intervals. He is delighted. He says he knew Meursault was clever, that he could tell he was someone who understood these things. He reads the letter again and declares it perfect. He slaps Meursault on the shoulder and says they are pals now, aren't they? Meursault says nothing at first. Then, because Raymond seems so genuinely set on the idea, and it makes no particular difference to Meursault either way. He nods and agrees. Yes, they are pals. The end of the evening, and Salamano's dog, they finish the wine. They sit for a while in comfortable silence, smoking. The street outside is quiet, with only occasional cars passing. Eventually Meursault remarked that it is getting late. Raymond agrees and notes that time has passed quickly this evening. Meursault is tired and ready for bed, but it takes an effort to rouse himself and make a move. Raymond notices his tiredness and tells him not to let things get him down. Meursault does not understand what he means at first. Then Raymond explains that he heard about Meursault's mother's death. He says it simply and kindly that it was something that was bound to happen one day or another. Meursault appreciates this. He says so. There is something in Raymond's directness that Meursault finds genuinely comforting, not the elaborate sympathy of people who expect grief to be performed, but a simple acknowledgement that death is a natural part of life. Raymond shakes Meursault's hand warmly as he leaves, remarking that men always understand each other. Meursault goes back to the landing outside his apartment. And here the chapter ends, with one of its most beautiful and quietly devastating passages. The building is completely silent. There is a dank, dark smell rising from the stairwell. Meursault stands still for a moment, hearing nothing but the sound of his own blood moving through his body, a strange, intimate detail, the sound of pure biological existence. Then, from inside Salamano's room, the dog begins to moan. It is a quiet, plaintive sound, rising slowly through the sleeping building, and Meursault describes it with a line of unexpected, almost poetic beauty. The little sound rising through the silence and darkness like a flower growing. The significance of Salamano's dog. The image of the dog moaning at the end of the chapter is one of those moments in the story where the surface simplicity conceals something much deeper. Salamano and his dog are, in a way, a mirror of sorts, a distorted, darkened reflection of Meursault and his mother, two beings who lived together, who irritated each other, who were bound together by circumstance and dependency rather than by any obviously expressed love. Meursault rarely visited his mother. Salamano beats his dog. And yet both relationships had a reality to them, a genuine, if difficult, connection. The dog's moan at the end of the chapter is the sound of loneliness. It is an animal mourning something, perhaps not entirely understanding what has been lost. And in the context of this chapter, a chapter about returning to work, about making new alliances, about writing a letter that could hurt someone badly, that small moan is a reminder that beneath the surface of ordinary life, things are being felt and suffered in ways that are not always visible or expressible. Meursault hears the sound. He notices it. He describes it beautifully. And then, presumably, he goes to bed. The character of Raymond Sintès. Raymond Sintès is one of the most morally complicated characters introduced so far. He is, by his own account and by neighborhood reputation, a man who lives on the margins of respectable society. Possibly a pimp. Certainly a man who uses violence freely and without much remorse. He beats the woman he was keeping. He beats a stranger on a street. He is planning an elaborate emotional humiliation for the woman he claims to be done with. And yet Raymond is also, in his way, genuinely warm toward Meursault. He is friendly, direct, uncomplicated in his affection. He shares his food and wine without pretense. He tells his story without trying to make himself look better than he is. He admits to beating the woman, admits to his anger and jealousy, does not dress it up in mortal language. He is, like Meursault, in his own way, a man who does not pretend. This does not make Raymond good. His treatment of the woman he was with is disturbing and cruel, but it helps explain why Meursault, who has a deep instinctive preference for honesty over performance, finds Raymond interesting rather than repellent. Raymond is direct. He says what he means. He does not play social games. These are qualities that Meursault values even when they appear in a person whose actions are morally questionable. The letter and its consequences. The letter that Meursault writes in this chapter is one of the most fateful acts in the entire story, though it does not feel that way at the time. Meursault writes it casually, without strong feeling, as a favor to a neighbor. He does not think deeply about where it might lead or what damage it might cause, but the letter is the first step in a chain of events that will ultimately bring Meursault to the beach and to the moment that will define the rest of his life. By agreeing to help Raymond, by writing the letter, by calling himself Raymond Spall, even out of indifference rather than active desire. Meursault has attached himself to Raymond's story, and Raymond's story is heading somewhere dangerous. The woman the letter is addressed to has a brother. That brother will appear later, and the beach, and the sun. And what happens there? All of it flows from this quiet evening in Raymond's dirty room, over black pudding and wine and a sheet of squared paper and purple ink. Meursault, moral passivity. This chapter raises an important question about Meursault that runs through the entire story. Is his passivity a form of innocence or a form of complicity? When Raymond tells his story, Meursault does not challenge him. When Raymond asks whether the woman deserved to be punished, Meursault says he supposes so. When Raymond asks him to write a letter designed to manipulate and hurt someone, Meursault agrees. He does these things not out of malice, not out of any desire to harm the woman, but simply out of a kind of frictionless acceptance of whatever is put in front of him. Meursault almost never refuses anything. He almost never initiates conflict. He goes along with what is happening around him, responding to the immediate with his characteristic honesty and without any strong moral framework to push back against what others propose. This makes him, in a sense, both innocent and dangerous. Innocent because he has no bad intentions, dangerous because his passivity makes him complicit in the intentions of others. The letter he writes for Raymond will hurt someone. The woman will receive it, will be drawn back, will be subjected to further humiliation. Meursault will have contributed to this, not out of cruelty, but out of indifference, out of his inability or unwillingness to say no, to refuse, to push back. Themes developed in Chapter 3. Loneliness and its strange forms, both Salamano with his dog and Raymond with his ex-lover, are portraits of a particular kind of loneliness, the kind that expresses itself through domination and cruelty rather than tenderness. These are people who cannot easily connect with others, who form bonds that are troubled and difficult, but who are nonetheless bound to those connections in ways they may not fully understand themselves. Moral passivity and complicity. Meursault's agreement to write the letter for Raymond is the chapter's central moral event. He does not write it out of malice, but he writes it, and in doing so, he makes himself part of something that will cause harm. His passivity, his inability to refuse to judge, to push back, is one of his defining qualities. And this chapter shows for the first time how that quality can make him complicit in the actions of others. The ordinary and the dangerous on the surface. This is an extremely ordinary evening. Dinner with a neighbor, some wine, a conversation, a favor, and yet within this ordinary frame, something significant is set in motion. The story is very good at showing how catastrophe grows from the most mundane and unremarkable of beginnings. Male friendship and solidarity. Raymond's comment at the end of the evening that men always understand each other captures something about the particular kind of bond forming between him and Meursault. It is not a deep friendship in any emotional sense, but it is a genuine alliance built on shared directness and a kind of mutual recognition. Raymond sees in Meursault someone who will not judge him, who will listen honestly, who will help without making it complicated. And Meursault, in turn, finds in Raymond someone who speaks plainly and does not perform. The sound of loneliness, the chapter's final image, the dog moaning in Salamano's room, the sound rising like a flower through the darkness, is one of the most beautiful and quietly haunting moments in the story so far. It brings together several of the chapter's themes: loneliness, dependency, the suffering of beings who cannot articulate what they feel, and the strange beauty that Meursault finds even in the most unlikely and painful corners of the world. Conclusion. Chapter 3 is, in many ways, the chapter where the story's engine begins to turn. The first two chapters established who Meursault is: his emotional honesty, his sensory awareness, his detachment from conventional social expectations. This chapter begins to show what that character will cost him. By agreeing to help Raymond, Meursault has entered into an alliance with a man whose story is heading toward violence and consequence. He has done this not out of any strong desire or deliberate choice, but simply because he had no strong reason not to. And this, the absence of strong reasons not to do things, is, in a sense, Meursault's defining vulnerability. The chapter ends with the dog's moan rising through the sleeping building, small, plaintive, full of a sorrow it cannot name. It is a sound that lingers, that stays with the reader after the chapter is finished, and it is, in its quiet way, a signal of what is coming, the loneliness and loss and strange, suffering beauty that runs through this entire story. Chapter 4. Introduction. Chapter 4 is one of the most eventful chapters in the story so far. While the previous chapters established a quiet, observational rhythm of Meursault's daily life and introduced the key figures around him, this chapter brings several of those threads together in ways that are dramatic, disturbing, and quietly revealing. The week passes quickly. Then a Saturday with Marie, warm, physical, full of the simple pleasures that Meursault values most. Then Sunday, and with it the sudden eruption of Raymond's violence against the woman he lured back with the letter Meursault helped write. And finally, at the end of the chapter, the disappearance of Salamano's dog, a small event, but one that opens a window into a loneliness so deep and so helpless that it leaves Meursault for the first time thinking about his mother. This chapter is rich with incident and implication. It deepens our understanding of every major character introduced so far. It shows us Meursault's passivity at its most morally significant, his decision not to intervene in Raymond's violence, his agreement to serve as Raymond's witness at the police station, his refusal to answer Marie's question about love with anything other than flat, honest uncertainty. And it ends on one of the most quietly moving notes in the story, the sound of an old man weeping through a wall and the unexpected thought of a dead mother. Te aga iwik basis. The chapter opens with a brief summary of the working week. Meursault has been busy at the office. Raymond dropped in at some point to mention that he had sent off the letter. The letter Meursault wrote for him in the previous chapter, designed to draw the woman back so that Raymond could humiliate and hurt her. Meursault notes this without particular reaction. The letter has been sent. The plan is in motion. He receives this information with the same calm detachment with which he receives everything. He also went to the cinema twice during the week with his colleague, Emmanuel. Emmanuel, it turns out, does not always follow what is happening on screen, and he regularly asks Meursault to explain the plot to him. Meursault does this without complaint or impatience. It is a small but telling detail. He is not a man who resents being asked things, who finds people tiresome, who begrudges his time. He goes to the cinema. He explains things when asked, and the evenings pass pleasantly enough. This opening paragraph is deliberately compressed. A week of ordinary life reduced to 2 brief observations. The story is not interested in the details of that week. What matters is what comes next on Saturday when Marie arrives. Saturday with Marie arrives as arranged, and from the moment she appears, the chapter shifts into a warmer, more vivid register, the particular quality of light and sensation that surrounds Meursault whenever Marie is present. She is wearing a dress with red and white stripes and leather sandals. Meursault cannot take his eyes off her. He notices, with his characteristic directness, the outline of her figure beneath the dress, and her face, sun-browned and warm, like a flower with a velvety surface. There is nothing prurient or objectifying in how Meursault sees Marie. He simply sees her as she is, and responds to what he sees with honest, uncomplicated attraction. She is beautiful and present and alive, and he is aware of all of this in a very immediate way. They take a bus to a beach that Meursault knows some miles outside Algiers. It is a particular kind of beach, a narrow strip of sand wedged between 2 rocky outcrops with a line of reeds along the back where the tide reaches. At 4 in the afternoon, the sun has softened from its peak intensity, and the water is pleasantly warm. Small, gentle waves move slowly up the sand. It is, in Meursault's telling, a place of quiet beauty, not spectacular, not dramatic, but good. Marie teaches him a game she knows. While swimming, you suck in the spray from the tops of waves until your mouth is full of foam. And then you float on your back and blow it upward toward the sky. The foam makes a small, frothy cloud that either dissolves into the air or falls back down in warm droplets onto your face. Meursault tries it, and after a while, his mouth begins to sting from all the salt. Then Marie swims up to him and presses close to him in the water, and they kiss. Her tongue cools the soreness on his lips. They let the waves roll them about together for a minute or 2 before swimming back to the beach. This scene, the game with the sea foam, the kiss in the water, the waves rolling over them, is one of the most tender and purely pleasurable passages in the chapter. It captures something essential about how Meursault experiences happiness, not through grand declarations or deep emotional intensity, but through simple, physical, sensory moments. The taste of salt, the warmth of the water, the sudden coolness of Marie's kiss. These are the things that constitute joy for him, and they are real and genuine and sufficient. When they have dressed and are ready to leave the beach, Marie looks at him for a long moment. Her eyes are bright. He kisses her. Neither of them speaks for a while. They scramble up the beach quickly, both in a hurry to catch the bus back to his apartment. They are eager for each other. The evening is spent together, his window open to the cool night air on their sun-warmed skin. Sunday morning, and the question of love. Marie stays the night and is still there in the morning. She is free all of Sunday, so Meursault proposes she'll have lunch with him. She agrees, and he goes out to buy meat for the meal. On his way back, he hears a woman's voice coming from Raymond's room. He notes this without particular alarm. The plan has been set in motion, and the woman has apparently returned, drawn in by the letter. Then, from elsewhere in the building, comes the familiar sound of old Salamano berating his dog, followed by the clumping of boots and paws on the wooden stairs, and Raymond's familiar curses fading out into the street. Back upstairs, he tells Marie about Salamano and his dog, the 8-year ritual of mutual animosity, the twice-daily walks, the beatings, and the cowering. Marie finds this funny. She is wearing one of Meursault's pajama tops with the sleeves rolled up, and she is laughing. And when she laughs, Meursault wants her again. There is something very natural and warm in this moment. The two of them in his apartment on a Sunday morning, she in his clothes, both relaxed and comfortable. Then comes one of the most important exchanges in the chapter, and indeed in the entire story up to this point. Marie looks at him and asks, quite directly, does he love her? Meursault's answer is careful and completely honest. He says that this kind of question does not really mean very much to him, that it has no particular significance. But since she is asking, he supposes he does not love her, not in any strong or definitive sense. Marie looks sad for a moment after this. It is a small, genuine wound, she asked. A vulnerable question, and received an answer that was honest, but not what she was hoping for. And yet she recovers. As they prepare lunch together, she brightens and begins laughing again. And when she laughs, Meursault wants to kiss her. This exchange is one of the clearest illustrations in the story of who Meursault is, and of the gap between him and the social world around him. Most people, when asked by a person they are close to whether they love them, would either affirm it or soften their uncertainty into something more palatable. Meursault does neither. He says honestly that the question does not mean much to him, and that he probably does not love her in the sense she means. He does not say this to be cruel. He says it because it is true, and because he does not know how to be anything other than true. But the scene also shows us something important. Marie does not leave. She is sad for a moment, and then she moves on. She is drawn to Meursault in a way that his honesty does not entirely destroy. There is something in him, his directness, his physical warmth, his quiet presence, that she values, even without the reassurance she was looking for. The violence in Raymond's room. Just as they are settling into the rhythm of preparing lunch together, the quiet of the Sunday morning is suddenly shattered. From Raymond's room, directly below, or adjacent, comes the sound of a woman's voice, high-pitched and frightened. Then Raymond's voice, loud and hard, telling her she let him down. And then the unmistakable sounds of violence, blows landing, and then a scream, sharp and piercing and cold in a way that cuts through the whole building. Within moments, there is a crowd gathering on the landing. Meursault and Marie go out to look. The sounds continue. The woman still screaming. Raymond still hitting her. Marie turns to Meursault and says, "It is horrible." He does not answer. She asks him to go and get a policeman. He says he does not like policemen. This moment, Marie calling Ramon's violence horrible. Meursault not answering. His refusal to involve the police is one of the most morally significant in the chapter. Meursault is not a man who enjoys violence. He is not thrilled by what is happening, but he does not act to stop it. And when Marie expresses distress and asks him to do something, he refuses on the grounds of his personal dislike of the police. This is not so. It is, again, a form of honesty. Meursault does not pretend to feel things he does not feel, and he does not perform actions he does not want to perform. But it is also a form of moral passivity that has real consequences. A woman is being beaten in the room next door, and Meursault does not intervene. A policeman does arrive, brought up by another neighbor, the plumber from the second floor. The policeman knocks on the door. The sounds inside stop. After a moment, Raymond opens the door. He has a cigarette hanging from his lip and a slightly sick smile on his face. He is trying to appear relaxed and in control. The policeman asks his name. Raymond gives it. The policeman tells him to take the cigarette out of his mouth when speaking to an officer. Raymond hesitates, glances at Meursault. For what reason? Exactly. It is not entirely clear. Perhaps for some kind of reassurance or solidarity. And then, in a small act of defiance, keeps the cigarette in. The policeman immediately swings his arm and slaps Raymond hard across the face. The cigarette flies from his lips and lands several feet away. Raymond's face twists, but he says nothing for a moment. Then he asks, in a humble voice, if he may pick up his cigarette. This is a revealing little scene. Raymond, who prides himself on his toughness, who beat a man bloody on who has just been beating a woman, is suddenly in the presence of official authority, entirely submissive. He accepts the slap. He asks permission to retrieve his cigarette. He has no power here, and he knows it. The woman, meanwhile, is still crying, calling Raymond a coward and a pimp. Raymond, always careful about his public image, asks the policeman whether it is proper for someone to call a man a pimp in front of witnesses. The policeman tells him to be quiet. Raymond turns to the woman and says, quietly but with clear menace, that they will meet again. The policeman tells him that is enough, sends the woman away, and orders Raymond to stay in his room until summoned to the station. Aftermath and lunch. The crowd disperses. Meursault and Marie go back to finish preparing lunch. But Marie has lost her appetite entirely. She is still shaken by what happened, still disturbed by the sounds of the violence and the woman's screaming. She eats almost nothing. Meursault eats nearly everything. She leaves at 1 o'clock, and he has a nap. This contrast, Marie unable to eat, Meursault eating heartily, is subtle but significant. Marie has been genuinely upset by what she witnessed. It has affected her physically, taken away her appetite, left her disturbed. Meursault has not been unaffected, but whatever he felt discomfort, mild distaste, perhaps, did not interfere with his hunger. He ate. He always responds to the immediate physical reality of his body, and his body was hungry. The violence next door was not pleasant, but it is over, and he is hungry. This is not callousness in the sense of cruelty. It is simply Meursault's way of inhabiting the world present in his body, responsive to immediate physical needs, not sustained in distress by things he cannot change or control. Raymond's visit and the offer of witness. Around 3 in the afternoon, there is a knock at Meursault's door. Raymond comes in and sits on the edge of the bed. He is quiet for a moment, then tells Meursault how the encounter with the woman went. At first, everything went as planned, exactly as he had described his intentions, but then she slapped him, and he lost his self-control completely and began beating her. The rest, he points out, Meursault already knows because he was there. Meursault's response is characteristically neutral. He says simply that Raymond did teach her a lesson, and that was what he wanted, wasn't it? Raymond agrees, and then raises the question of the police. He wants to know what Meursault thinks. Should he have hit the policeman back when the policeman slapped him? Meursault tells him honestly that he had not expected anything one way or another. He has, he repeats, no use for the police. Raymond seems satisfied and relieved by this answer. Perhaps he was worried that Meursault would judge him for not retaliating, or for some other aspect of the encounter. Meursault's neutrality is, in its way, a kind of comfort. Then Raymond asks something more significant. He says he would like Meursault to act as his witness when he goes to the police station, to testify on his behalf. Meursault says he has no objection. He asks what he would need to say. Raymond explains that it is simple. Meursault only needs to say that the woman had let Raymond down, that she was unfaithful to him, that she had behaved badly. Meursault agrees. This agreement is another of those quietly significant moments in the chapter. Meursault is agreeing to be a character witness for a man who has just beaten a woman badly enough that her screams could be heard throughout the building. He is agreeing to testify in Raymond's favor, to confirm a version of events that casts Raymond as the wronged party. He is doing this, as with the letter, without malice, but also without any moral evaluation of what he is agreeing to do. He simply has no objection. And so he says yes. An afternoon with Raymond. Raymond invites Meursault out for the afternoon. They go to a cafe where Raymond buys brandy. Then they play billiards, a close game that Meursault loses by only a few points. Raymond then proposes visiting a brothel, but Meursault declines. He simply does not feel like it. They walk home slowly. Instead, Raymond is in a good mood, pleased with himself, satisfied that he has dealt with the woman in the way he planned. He is very friendly to Meursault, warm and expansive. And Meursault, for his part, genuinely enjoys the walk. Not because he particularly admires Raymond or agrees with what he has done, but because the afternoon is pleasant. Raymond is good company when he is in a good mood, and walking slowly home through the streets in the early evening is a simple, agreeable thing. This is one of the things that makes Meursault such an unusual character. He is capable of enjoying the company of a man he has just watched be submissively led away by a policeman after beating a woman, not because he endorses what Raymond does, but because his enjoyment of a moment is not contingent on the moral character of the person he is with. He responds to the immediate, to the pleasantness of the walk, the warmth of the evening, Raymond's easy friendliness. The moral dimension of their relationship does not overshadow the sensory reality of the afternoon. The disappearance of Salamano's dog. When they get home, they find Salamano standing outside the front door of the building. Something is immediately wrong. The old man is in a state of agitated distress, turning around and around on the spot, looking in every direction, peering into the dark hallway, muttering to himself. The dog is nowhere to be seen. Raymond asks, "What is wrong?" Salamano does not answer at first, continuing to mutter. Then he blurts out his names for the dog. The same angry, abusive names he always uses. And when Meursault asks directly where the dog is, Salamano says flatly, "Gone." Then the story comes out. Salamano had taken the dog for its regular walk on the parade ground. There was a fair there, and the area was crowded with people. Salamano stopped for a moment to watch an attraction, a man who performs escape acts with handcuffs. When he turned around, the dog was gone. It had slipped its collar. Salamano had been meaning to get a smaller collar for some time, but had never gotten around to it, and now the dog has used the slack to escape. Raymond tries to reassure him. He says dogs always find their way home. He tells stories of dogs that have traveled enormous distances back to their masters. But Salamano is not reassured. His worry is not that the dog has run away and will not return. His worry is more specific and more terrible. The police will find the dog wandering and take it to the pound, and because of its appearance, the scabs, the missing hair, the general miserable condition of the animal, no one will claim it or adopt it, and then they will put it down. Meursault tells him that the pound holds stray dogs for 3 days, giving owners time to come and collect them. Salamano asks how much it costs to get a dog back from the pound. Meursault does not know. Salamano immediately shifts into anger, saying he would never pay money for a dog like that they can do whatever they want with the beast, that he does not care. But this performance of indifference is transparently false. The old man is clearly terrified of losing the dog. His rage is a cover for his fear. He is shouting its names, the same insults he has hurled at it twice a day for 8 years. But the shouting now has a different quality to it. The cruelty that characterized his relationship with the dog, when the dog was present, has thinned to reveal the dependency beneath it. Raymond laughs and goes inside. Meursault follows. They part on the landing. Salamano at the door. A few minutes later, Meursault hears Salamano's footsteps on the landing, and then a quiet knock at his door. He opens it. The old man is standing there, not quite meeting his eyes, staring down at the floor. His hands are shaking, those worn, gnarled old hands that have beaten the dog so many times. He apologizes for the intrusion. Meursault invites him in. But Salamano does not come in. He stays in the doorway, and without looking up, he says quietly, They will not really take the dog away from him, will they? They would not really do something like that, because if they did, he does not know what would become of him. This is the emotional heart of the chapter. In this one small confession, we understand everything about Salamano and his dog that the previous chapters have been slowly building toward. The 8 years of abuse and dependency, the twice daily walks, the beatings and the cursing, all of it suddenly resolves into this. An old man at a neighbor's door in the evening, trembling and barely holding himself together, asking whether he will be allowed to keep the one living creature that shares his life. The dog, for all that Salamano treats it cruelly, is the center of his world. Without it, he does not know what will become of him. These are not the words of a man who is indifferent to his animal. They are the words of a man who has perhaps never known how to love anything properly, who can only express connection through irritation and violence, but who loves in his own broken, inadequate way. Nonetheless, Meursault tells him, as honestly as he can, what he knows, that the pound keeps strays for 3 days, and after that disposes of them as it sees fit. Salamano looks at him for a moment, then says good evening and leaves. Meursault hears him pacing in his room for a long time. Then the creak of the bed, and then, through the thin wall between their rooms, the sound of the old man weeping. A quiet, stifled sound, barely audible, but unmistakable. The final thought. The chapter ends with Meursault lying in bed and the sound of Salamano's weeping carrying through the wall. And then something happens that has not happened before in the story. Something small but significant. Meursault begins thinking about his mother. He does not know why. He says he cannot identify what triggered the thought. Perhaps it is the weeping, the sound of an old person alone and in distress. Perhaps it is the particular quality of loss that fills the building that night. The woman beaten and sent away, the dog missing, the old man crying. Perhaps it is simply that grief has a way of finding its moment of surfacing unexpectedly in quiet, unguarded spaces. He does not dwell on the thought. He does not describe what exactly he thinks about his mother, or what feelings the thought brings. He simply notes that, for some reason, the thought of her came to him, and then, because he has to be up early the next morning, and because he is not hungry, he does not bother with supper. He goes straight to bed. The chapter closes on this note, simple, restrained, and quietly resonant. The weeping through the wall, the unexpected thought of his mother, the early morning coming, and sleep. The significance of Marie's question. Marie's question, "Do you love me?" deserves careful consideration, because it is one of the most important moments in Meursault's developing relationship with her, and it illustrates something fundamental about who he is. Most people, when asked this question by someone they are sleeping with, someone they enjoy spending time with, someone they find attractive and warm and good to be around, would say yes whether or not they meant it fully, whether or not they were certain. They would say yes because it is what the moment requires, because it is kind, because it costs nothing to give someone that reassurance. Meursault cannot do this, not because he is deliberately cruel, but because he genuinely cannot affirm something he does not feel with certainty. The question itself, he says, has no real meaning for him, and insofar as it does mean something, his honest answer is that he probably does not love her. This is painful for Marie, and it is one of the clearest illustrations in the chapter of what Meursault's particular kind of honesty costs both him and the people around him. His refusal to perform conventional love does not make him cold or unfeeling. He desires Marie deeply. He values her company. He is attuned to her laughter and her presence in a way that is genuine and warm. But he will not call this love simply because the word is expected of him. Later in the story, Marie will ask him to marry her. His response to that question will be equally honest and equally unsatisfying. He will say he does not mind, that it makes no difference to him, but that if she wants to, they can. This consistent refusal to perform conventional emotional landmarks, love, commitment, grief, is what will ultimately be used to condemn him, the moral weight of witness. When Raymond asks Meursault to serve as his witness, and Meursault agrees, this is another step in the story's quiet accumulation of moral consequence. Each time Meursault helps Raymond writing the letter, agreeing to testify, he does so without strong feeling, without deliberate choice, simply because he has no particular reason not to. And each time, the consequences are a little more serious. By agreeing to be Raymond's witness, Meursault is agreeing to stand before the police and support the narrative of a man who has just beaten a woman badly enough to make the whole building hear her screaming. He is agreeing to characterize the victim as the guilty party, as a woman who deserved punishment because she was unfaithful. He will not be lying. Exactly. The woman did receive money from Raymond, and she may have been seeing other men, but he will be choosing to present a version of events that serves Raymond's interests and erases the woman's suffering from the picture. Meursault does not think about any of this. He simply has no objection. And so, he says, yes. His passivity here is not innocent. It has real moral weight, even if he does not feel it. Salamano as Amiravlos. The portrait of Salamano in this chapter is one of the richest and most moving in the story. What begins as a slightly comic sketch of an old man and his miserable dog deepens over the course of the chapter into something genuinely heartbreaking. Salamano's cruelty toward the dog has always been, in a strange way, a form of engagement, a form of relationship. However twisted and painful, the daily walks, the arguments, the beatings, and the cowering, these were rituals of connection. They structured his days. They gave him something to react to, something that reacted to him. The dog was a presence in his life, however unwilling and Now the dog is gone, and without it, Salamano does not know what he will do. The trembling hands, the staring at the floor, the careful politeness at Meursault's door, these are not the behaviors of a man who is mildly inconvenienced. They are the behaviors of a man who is facing something like annihilation, the prospect of being entirely alone in a small room with no living thing to connect to. He's weeping, heard through the wall. He's the sound of a loneliness that has no language for itself, that has expressed itself for 8 years through insults and abuse, and can only now, in the silence of the lost animal's absence, find its true form. The unexpected thought of his mother, the fact that Salamano's weeping makes Meursault think of his mother, is one of the most important moments in the chapter, and one of the most revealing. It suggests that Meursault's relationship with his mother was not simply one of indifference. Like Salamano and his dog, like Raymond and his woman, it was a complicated relationship, shaped by proximity and dependency and perhaps not much in the way of expressed tenderness. They lived together, barely talked, watched each other from a distance. And then she went to the home, and he visited rarely, and then she died, and he buried her without visible grief. But hearing Salamano weep for his lost dog, hearing the sound of a particular kind of love that has no proper language, that has always expressed itself through irritation and distance and cannot now express itself at all because the object of that love is gone, Meursault thinks of his mother, unbidden, for a reason. He cannot name. This is one of the story's quiet revelations. Meursault did feel something about his mother, not in the conventional way, not in the way society expected him to feel and display grief, but something. Something that surfaces in the night through the wall in response to an old man's weeping for a lost animal. Something that does not have a proper name, and that Meursault himself cannot quite identify or explain. Themes developed in Chapter 4. Love and its limits. Maurice's question about love, and Meursault's honest answer, raises one of the chapter's central themes, the gap between conventional emotional performance and genuine feeling. Meursault does not lie to Marie, but his honesty is not entirely kind, and it points to one of the fundamental ways in which he is out of step with the social world around him. Violence and its consequences. The beating in Raymond's room is the most direct and explicit act of violence in the story so far. It has real consequences. Police involvement, Marie's distress, Raymond's summons to the station, and it implicates Meursault through his agreement to serve as witness in something he did not directly cause but has now chosen to support. Complicity and passivity. Meursault's agreement to testify for Raymond is another example of the moral passivity that runs through his character. He does not choose to do harm, but he repeatedly fails to choose not to. And in doing so, he becomes an instrument of other people's intentions without ever fully registering what those intentions mean. Loneliness and dependency. Salamano's story in this chapter is the most explicit portrait of loneliness in the story so far. His relationship with his dog is a study in how human beings form attachments even in the absence of kindness, how dependency and habit can create a bond that transcends affection, and how devastating its loss can be. Grief without language. Both Salamano's situation and the final thought of his mother suggest a kind of grief that has no proper language, that has expressed itself in indirect and inadequate ways throughout a lifetime, and that only makes itself known in moments of unexpected stillness. Meursault's grief for his mother, like Salamano's love for his dog, does not look what it is. Conclusion. Chapter 4 is the richest and most emotionally complex chapter in the story so far. It brings together the threads introduced in previous chapters: Meursault's relationship with Marie, his alliance with Raymond, his neighbor Salamano, and develops each of them into something more substantial and more morally significant. The beating in Raymond's room, the question of love on the Sunday morning, the agreement to serve as witness, the disappearance of the dog, the old man weeping through the wall. Each of these events adds a new layer to the story, deepens its moral texture, and moves its characters closer to the consequences that are quietly gathering around them. And the chapter's final note: Meursault is thinking of his mother. Unexpectedly, in the dark, as an old man weeps for a lost animal, is one of the most quietly powerful in the story so far. It suggests that beneath the surface of Meursault's apparent indifference, there is something real and unresolved, something that does not know its own name, but that is there nonetheless, surfacing in the night without warning in response to the grief of others. Chapter 5, Introduction. Chapter 5 is one of the quietest and yet most philosophically rich chapters in the story so far. On the surface, very little happens. A phone call at the office, a conversation with an employer, an evening with Marie, a strange woman at a restaurant, and a late-night visit from a grieving old neighbor. No violence, no dramatic confrontation, no obvious turning point, and yet this chapter contains some of the most important exchanges in the entire first half of the story. In a single evening, Meursault is asked whether he wants to change his life, whether he loves Marie, and whether he wants to marry her. His answers to all three questions are essentially the same. He does not mind. It makes no difference. One thing is as good as another. And in these responses, the story lays out its philosophical core with unusual clarity and directness. The chapter also gives us the most complete and compassionate portrait of Salamano that we have seen, a man whose grief over his lost dog opens into a full and unexpectedly moving life story, and whose final words to Meursault are among the most quietly haunting in the chapter. The phone call from Raymond. The chapter opens with a phone call. Raymond rings Meursault at the office. He has spoken to a friend about Meursault, and this friend has invited both of them to spend next Sunday at his small seaside bungalow outside Meursault says he would have liked to come, but he had already promised to spend the day with a girl. Raymond immediately resolves this. The girl can come too. The friend's wife would be glad of the female company in what would otherwise be an entirely male gathering. Meursault would have preferred to hang up quickly, as his employer disapproves of personal calls during work hours. But Raymond has something else to tell him. The real reason he called: he has been followed all morning by a group of Arab men. One of them is the brother of the woman Raymond had the violent confrontation with in the previous chapter. Raymond asks Meursault to let him know if he sees any of them hanging around the building when he comes home. Meursault agrees. He says he will pass the word. This short exchange is deceptively significant. The brother of Raymond's woman has now appeared, or rather, has been noticed as a presence, a shadow following Raymond through the streets of Algiers. He is not named. He has no face yet in the narrative. He is simply a threat on the periphery, a consequence of the violence that Meursault has passively enabled through writing the letter and agreeing to be Raymond's witness. The fact that Raymond mentions this almost as an afterthought, that he called primarily about the Sunday invitation and only secondarily mentions being followed by the woman's brother, captures something about how danger approaches in this story. It does not announce itself dramatically. It arrives in the middle of a conversation about bungalows and weekend plans, the employer's proposal. Immediately after Raymond's call, Meursault is summoned to his employer's office. For a moment, he feels a flicker of unease. He assumes he is going to be reprimanded for using the office phone for a personal call. But it turns out to be something else entirely. The employer has a business proposal. He is considering opening a branch office in Paris, and he wants someone capable to run it, to deal with major clients on the ground rather than through the slow back and forth of postal correspondence. He is offering this position to Meursault. He frames it generously. Meursault is young, Paris would be exciting for him, and the role would involve travel around France for several months of the year. It is, by any conventional measure, an attractive opportunity. Meursault's response is characteristic. He says he is perfectly willing to go to Paris, but he also makes clear that he does not particularly care one way or the other. He has no strong feeling about it. The employer presses him a little. Surely a change of life would appeal to him. The phrase, a change of life, is interesting. It frames the offer not just as a career move, but as a transformation, an improvement, an escape from the ordinary into something more significant. And Meursault's response to this framing is one of the most philosophically direct statements he makes in the entire story. He says that one never really changes one's way of life, that any one life is as good as another, and that his current life suits him well enough. The employer is visibly hurt by this. He tells Meursault that he always hedges and that he lacks ambition, and that in business, ambition is an essential quality. Meursault returns to his desk. He does not want to upset his employer, and he acknowledges this briefly, but he genuinely sees no reason to change his life, and he explains his position to himself internally with quiet clarity. He says that, as a student, he had ambition, the kind of ambition his employer means. But when he had to abandon his studies, he quickly realized that all of it, the striving, the planning, the forward projection of a life towards some imagined better future, was essentially futile. Not in a dramatic, despairing way, simply futile. Life is what it is, now, in the present moment. One life is as good as another. Paris is as good as staying is as good as going. This is the philosophical heart of the chapter, and one of the clearest expressions of Meursault's worldview in the entire story. He is not depressed. He is not nihilistic in a destructive sense. He simply does not believe that one arrangement of life is inherently superior to another. He lives in the present, responds to what is immediately in front of him, and does not invest in the idea that the future holds something better or worse than the present. Whatever comes will be as good as what is. Marie's visit and a question of marriage. That evening, Marie comes over, and the conversation that follows is one of the most important in the entire chapter, and indeed in the entire story. She asks him to marry her. Meursault's response is calm and honest, and, to most readers, deeply unsettling. He says he does not mind. If she is keen on it, they can get married. She then asks, again, whether he loves her. He replies as he did before. The question means very little to him, but he supposes he does not love her, not in the way she means. Marie asks the obvious question. If that is how he feels, why would he agree to marry her? Meursault explains that it has no real importance. If getting married would give her pleasure, he is willing. He points out that the idea came from her in the first place. He merely said yes. She tries a different angle. Is marriage not a serious matter? He sees no. She goes quiet for a moment, looking at him with that particular attention she sometimes gives him, watchful, slightly bewildered, trying to understand something about him that does not quite add up. Then she asks if another girl had asked him to marry her, a girl he liked in the same way he likes Marie, would he have said yes to her too? He says, naturally. Marie then reflects out loud on whether she truly loves him or not. Meursault cannot help her with this. After another pause, she says something that is both an observation and a kind of confession, that he is a strange man, and that she thinks this strangeness is probably why she loves him. But maybe, she adds quietly, it is also why she might one day come to hate him. Meursault has nothing to say to this, so he says nothing. There is a silence. Then Marie appears to make a decision. She smiles, takes his arm, and says she does want to marry him. She means it sincerely. He agrees. They will get married whenever she likes. He then mentions his employer's proposal about Paris. Marie is immediately enthusiastic. She would love to go to Paris. He tells her what Paris is like from his own experience. Gloomy and gray, full of pigeons and dark courtyards, with pale, washed-out faces everywhere. It is not a flattering description, but it is his honest impression. They walk together through the town. The women they pass are attractive, and Meursault points this out to Marie, who agrees. Then they walk in silence for a while. He does not want her to leave, so he suggests dinner at Celeste's, but she already has plans for the evening. They say goodbye near his apartment. As she is turning to go, she asks, with a slight edge in her voice, whether he wants to know what she is doing that evening. He realizes he had not asked, had not thought to ask, and she has noticed this absence. He looks embarrassed. She laughs, comes back, and kisses him on the lips, and leaves. The meaning of the marriage conversation. This conversation between Meursault and Marie is one of the most philosophically significant exchanges in the chapter, and it deserves careful unpacking. When Marie asks him to marry her, and he agrees without enthusiasm, and then admits that he would have agreed to marry any other girl who liked him in the same way. This is not cruelty, it is honesty. Meursault genuinely does not make the kind of hierarchical judgments about people and relationships that most people make. He does not experience Marie as uniquely irreplaceable. He likes her, enjoys being with her, finds her attractive and warm and good company, but he does not believe that this particular combination, this particular woman, constitutes something that no other arrangement of his life could replicate. This is deeply uncomfortable for Marie, as it would be for most people. We want to be told that we are chosen, that out of all possible people, this specific person with their specific qualities and specific presence is the one who is wanted and valued above all others. Meursault cannot give this, not because he's cold, but because he genuinely does not experience the world in this way. And yet, Marie stays. She is sad. She is slightly wounded. She wonders whether she loves him, but she decides, in the end, that she does want to marry him. She calls him strange and says that is perhaps why she loves him. There is something in his very differentness, his refusal to perform, his honest indifference to convention, that draws her, even as it troubles her. Her final observation, that this strangeness might one day make her hate him, is quietly prescient. The same quality that attracts her to him is the quality that will ultimately destroy him, not because that quality is evil, but because the world is not prepared to accept it. The strange woman at Meursault goes to dinner at Celeste's salon that evening, and here the chapter introduces one of its most memorable minor characters, a small, unusual woman who sits down at his table. She is compact and round-faced, with bright eyes and a remarkably quick, jerky way of moving, as if she is operated by strings or springs rather than by ordinary human muscle and intention. After sitting down, she opens the menu and studies it with an intensity that seems almost out of proportion, as if the bill of fare contains something of genuine importance that requires total concentration. When the waiter comes, she gives her order rapidly and precisely, every word clear. No hesitation, no wasted syllables. While waiting for her food to arrive, she opens her bag, takes out a slip of paper and a pencil, and calculates the exact cost of what she has ordered in advance before the food even arrives. She then counts out the exact amount of money, plus a small tip, and places it carefully on the table in front of her. When her food comes, she eats it voraciously, quickly, efficiently, without apparent pleasure or displeasure, simply consuming. While waiting for her next course, she takes out a blue pencil and a radio listings magazine and begins methodically going through the week's programming, marking almost every item with a tick. She continues this through the entire meal, barely looking up, completely absorbed. When she finishes eating, she stands, puts her jacket back on with the same abrupt, mechanical precision with which she does everything, and walks briskly out of the restaurant. Meursault, having nothing better to do, follows her for a short distance. She moves at an extraordinary pace for such a small person, walking absolutely straight along the edge of the pavement, never deviating, never looking back. She is so fast that he soon loses sight of her and turns back toward home. He calls her, privately, the little robot, and he notes that she impressed him briefly, before he forgot about her entirely. This episode, occupying only a few paragraphs, is one of the most puzzling and fascinating in the chapter. The woman appears suddenly, does her precise and mysterious things, and disappears. She is never explained, never encountered again in the story. She exists as a kind of pure observation, a strange, vivid, human fragment, but she is also, in a subtle way, a kind of mirror image of Meursault himself. Like him, she is efficient and unlike him, she does exactly what she intends to do, without performance or pretense or social lubricant. Like him, she is entirely absorbed in her own system of living, indifferent to how it might appear to others. She is methodical where he is passive, phronetic where he is still, but both of them inhabit their own particular way of being in the world, with complete self-sufficiency, without reference to what others expect of them. Meursault finds her impressive, not because she is admirable in any conventional sense, but because she is entirely, completely herself. Salamano's story: when Meursault arrives home that evening, he runs into old Salamano again. He invites him in. Salamano sits down heavily and tells him the news. The dog is definitely gone. He went to the pound to inquire, and the dog was not there. The staff told him it had probably been hit by a car. When he asked about checking with the police, they told him the police had more pressing concerns than tracking down stray dogs killed on the roads. Meursault suggests he could get another dog. Salamano dismisses this reasonably enough. He had become used to this one. It would not be the same. They sit together for a while. Meursault is slightly bored. He has nothing to do and is not yet sleepy, so he keeps the conversation going by asking questions. He asks how long Salamano had the dog, how he came to get it, and Salamano talks. And what he says is one of the most unexpectedly moving pieces of personal history in the chapter, a life story compressed into a few paragraphs, full of loss and adaptation and the particular loneliness of a man who has outlasted everything he was attached to. He got the dog after his wife died. He married relatively late. As a young man, his dream had been the stage. He had done theatrical performances during his military service and had apparently shown genuine talent. People said he acted well, but this ambition never materialized into anything real, and he ended up taking a job with the railway instead. He does not regret this. He says the railway gave him a pension, a stable life, but the dream was not realized. He and his wife had not been a particularly happy couple. They never really got along, but they got used to each other, and when she died, he was left entirely alone. A colleague whose dog had just had puppies offered him one, and he took it. He needed a companion, something living to share his days. He had to feed it from a bottle when it was very small, and as the years passed, they grew old together. The dog aging faster than the man, but both of them moving in the same direction. This small, detailed Salamano, every night, carefully rubbing ointment into the scabby skin of his miserable dog, is one of the most quietly devastating images in the chapter. It sits entirely at odds with the picture of the old man we have had up to now, the beatings, the insults, the relentless cruelty of the twice-daily walks. And yet it is completely consistent with everything we now understand about him. He did not know how to be tender in any obvious or conventional way, but he tried to heal the dog when it was sick. He stayed up at night, trying to ease its suffering. He loved it, in the only way he knew how. Meursault yawns honestly, without trying to hide it, and Salamano gets ready to leave. Meursault tells him he can stay, and says he is sorry about the dog. Salamano thanks him, and then he says something unexpected. He says that Meursault's mother was very fond of the dog. He refers to her gently and with sympathy as your poor mother. He says he imagines Meursault must be finding the grief very hard. Meursault says nothing, and Salamano, perhaps embarrassed by the silence, quickly adds something else, that some people in the neighborhood have been saying unkind things about Meursault because he sent his mother to the home. But Salamano himself knows better. He knows that Meursault was devoted to his mother. Meursault is surprised to hear that people have been speaking critically of him. He says he did not know his behavior had created a bad impression. He explains his reasons plainly and without defensiveness. He could not afford to keep her at home. The home was the obvious solution, and in any case by the end she had stopped speaking to him. And he could see she was lonely and bored without people her own age to talk to. Salamano not. At a home one makes friends. He agrees. He stands to leave. And then he does something he has never done before in all the time Meursault has known him. He holds out his hand, shyly, a little awkwardly. Meursault shakes it and feels the rough, scaly skin. The same skin that has struck his dog so many times over 8 years. And at the door, Salamano turns and smiles slightly and says his final line of the chapter. He hopes the dogs will not bark tonight, because whenever he hears one barking, he always thinks it is his. The significance of Salamano's final line. This last line, let's hope the dogs won't bark again tonight. I always think it's mine, is one of the most affecting moments in the chapter. It captures everything about Salamano's grief in a single image. The dog is gone. It has probably been killed. And yet Salamano, lying in his room at night, still hears it in every bark that comes from the street. He cannot stop expecting it. He cannot adjust, in a matter of days, to the absence of something that shared his life for 8 years. This is grief in one of its most honest and universal forms. Not dramatic, not articulate, not expressed in weeping or formal mourning. Just the persistent, involuntary expectation of something that is no longer there. The way the mind and the senses refuse to accept an absence that the intellect already knows is permanent. Salamano does not have the language for his loss. He never did. For 8 years, he expressed his attachment to his dog through insults and beatings and the rigid ritual of the twice-daily walk. Now that the dog is gone, he can only gesture toward the grief sideways. Through this small observation about the barking dogs at night, Meursault's admission about his mother. The moment when Salamano mentions that people have been talking badly about Meursault for placing his mother in the home is one of the most significant in the chapter. This is the first time Meursault has been directly told that others judge him for his treatment of his mother, and his response is interesting. He says genuinely that he is surprised to have created such a bad impression. He did not know. He was not doing something he thought would reflect poorly on him. He was making what seemed to him the obvious practical decision. He could not afford to keep her at home. The home was better equipped to care for her, and in any case, she was unhappy with him because she had nothing to do and no one her own age to talk to. These are the same reasons he gave in chapter 1, when reflecting on the warden's implicit criticism. And they are, as before, honest reasons. They are not the most flattering portrait of himself. He admits that part of the reason he rarely visited was the inconvenience of the journey, but they are real. He is not pretending to a devotion he did not have, and he is not denying whatever connection did exist. What is significant here is the way Salamano responds. He accepts Meursault's explanation without judgment. He says simply that, at a home one makes friends. He is not shocked by Meursault's honesty. He does not require the performance of grief or devotion. He simply accepts that people do what they can with what they have, and that the relationship between Meursault and his mother was what it was, not perfect, not fully expressed, but real in its own way. This exchange between two men whose emotional lives are largely inexpressible, whose connections have always been marked by distance and inadequacy and the failure of conventional tenderness, has a quality of mutual recognition. Neither of them is very good at love in the way the world expects. Both of them have lost someone or something that mattered to them more than they knew how to show. And in this small, awkward, late-night conversation, they understand each other without needing to say so. Parallels between Meursault and Salamano. One of the most quietly important aspects of chapter 5 is the way it deepens the parallels between Meursault and Salamano that have been building since the old man was introduced. Both of them had relationships with people close to them. Meursault with his mother, Salamano with his wife, and Salamano with his dog, that were characterized by distance, silence, and an absence of conventionally expressed affection. In both cases, the relationship involved cohabitation and dependency without much tenderness. In both cases, the connection was real but inexpressible in the languages that society recognizes as love. Both men are being judged for their inadequacy in these relationships, Meursault by the neighborhood gossips, who criticize him for sending his mother to a home. Salamano by people like Sintès, who say the way he treats his dog is a crying shame. And both men, when given the opportunity to explain themselves, do so in terms that are practical and honest, rather than emotionally satisfying. And both of them, in their different ways, are grieving. Salamano openly, in tears in the night. Meursault quietly, in the unexpected thought of his mother that surfaced at the end of the previous chapter. Neither of them has an adequate language for what they feel. Neither of them expresses loss in the way the world expects. But the loss is there. Emu, ehi, seu, elite, and ambition. The conversation with the employer about Paris and ambition is worth returning to because it is one of the clearest articulations of Meursault's philosophy in the story so far. His employer frames ambition as a moral quality. The lack of it is, in his view, a grave defect. A person who does not want to improve their circumstances, who does not strive for better positions and more interesting lives, is somehow deficient. Meursault does not accept this framework. He does not argue against it directly. He simply states his own position, plainly and without apology. One life is as good as another. The present life suits him. He had ambition once, as a student, but when circumstances forced him to abandon his studies, he realized quickly that the whole striving orientation toward a better future was essentially futile. He adapted. He found that the life he had, modest, present-focused, sensory, was sufficient. This is not laziness. Exactly. It is something more philosophical. A genuine refusal to accept the premise that any particular arrangement of life is inherently superior to another, or that the future holds something that the present lacks. Meursault lives in the immediate. He responds to what is directly in front of him. He does not project himself forward into a wished-for future self, and he is within the boundaries of his own experience content. The employer's hurt reaction is telling. He is not just disappointed by a professional decision. He is disturbed by a value system that does not share his fundamental assumption that life should be directed toward improvement. That ambition is avert that choosing Paris over Algiers, when given the chance, represents a proper engagement with the possibilities of existence. Meursault's refusal of this assumption is, to the employer, not just a personal quirk, but a kind of moral failure. This scene anticipates, in miniature, the larger judgment that Meursault will face later in the story. A society that cannot understand a man who does not want what it has decided everyone should want. Marie and the impossibility of conventional love. The marriage conversation deepens our understanding of Marie in ways that are important. She is not a simple character. She knows, after this conversation, exactly what she is dealing with. A man who does not love her in any definitive sense, who would marry her mainly because she wants to be married, who would have said yes to any other girl in the same situation. She knows all of this, and she still wants to marry him. Her observation that his strangeness is why she loves him, and perhaps why she might one day hate him, is one of the most psychologically astute things said about Meursault in the entire story up to this point. She sees him clearly. She does not romanticize him. She understands that the very quality that makes him compelling, his absolute refusal to perform, his complete honesty, his indifference to conventional emotional milestones, is also the quality that could become unbearable, that could curdle love into something else. But she chooses him anyway. This choice is important. Marie is not a fool, and she is not desperate. She is a warm, attractive, capable young woman who could presumably find a man willing to declare his love properly and mean it in the conventional sense. She chooses Meursault, knowing what she is choosing, and this makes her, in a way, the character in the story who most clearly understands and accepts him for what he is, the little robot as a philosophical figure. The strange woman at Sintès restaurant is one of the chapter's most puzzling elements, and it is worth thinking about what she represents and why she appears. She is, in miniature, an extreme case of a certain kind of self. She has reduced the social ritual of eating out, which for most people involves ease, conversation, enjoyment, the pleasure of being served, and of participating in a shared public space, to a series of perfectly efficient actions. She calculates, pays exactly, eats quickly, ticks her radio listings, and leaves. She extracts what she needs from the situation and contributes nothing that is not required. She is entirely self. Meursault is fascinated by her, not in a sentimental way. He forgets about her quickly enough, but something in her behavior strikes him as impressive. She is, in her way, a more extreme version of his own approach to the world, stripped of warmth and physicality, but recognizable in its efficiency and its indifference to social performance. The fact that he calls her a robot is interesting. It is a slightly unfair label. She is clearly a human being with her own internal system of living, but it reflects the way her behavior appears from the outside: mechanical, predictable, optimized. And this is, of course, how Meursault's own behavior appears to others. The robot label is, in a sense, what society applies to anyone who refuses to perform the expected emotional textures of ordinary life. Themes developed in Chapter 5. the rejection of ambition and forward-looking life. Meursault's response to his employer's proposal is the chapter's clearest philosophical statement. His belief that one life is as good as another, that striving for a different future is essentially futile, is the foundation of everything that makes him unusual and everything that makes him dangerous to conventional society. Honest love and its social costs. The marriage conversation shows, more clearly than anything before, the gap between Meursault's honest relationship to his own feelings and the emotional performances that society expects from people in love. He cannot say he loves Marie because he does not know that he does. He cannot call marriage serious because he does not experience it as such. And in refusing to lie about these things, he creates a wound that Marie feels even as she decides to accept him. Grief without ceremony. Salamano's story deepens the chapter's meditation on grief and loss. His nightly rubbing of ointment into the dog's diseased skin. His involuntary response to barking dogs at night. These are the expressions of a love that never learned to speak its own language. Like Meursault's relationship with his mother, it is real but inexpressible in any form that the world would recognize. Reputation and judgment. The revelation that neighbors have been criticizing Meursault for placing his mother in a home introduces the theme of social judgment more directly than before. Meursault did not know he was being talked about. He had not thought about how his decision would appear to others. He was simply making what seemed like the practical and obvious choice. But the world was watching and drawing conclusions. Self-sufficiency in its strangeness. The little robot woman at Sintès is a compressed portrait of complete self, a person who has eliminated from her public behavior everything that is not strictly functional. Meursault's admiration for her, brief and quickly forgotten, is a recognition of something he shares with her and a hint of how that quality appears from the outside. Conclusion. Chapter 5 is the most philosophically explicit chapter in the story so far. In a series of quiet, ordinary conversations with an employer, a girlfriend, a strange woman in a restaurant, a grieving old neighbor, it lays out the core of Meursault's worldview with unusual directness. He does not want to change his life because one life is as good as another. He does not love Marie in any definitive sense because the question of love has no particular meaning for him. He will marry her if she wants to because he has no strong objection, and her happiness in this matter is as valid a reason to do something as any other. He finds the little robot woman impressive because she, like him, is entirely herself, without apology or performance. And he listens to Salamano's story with genuine attention, recognizing in the old man something of himself, a person whose connections to others have always been imperfect and inarticulate, but no less real for that. The chapter ends on one of the most touching notes in the story, Salamano's shy handshake and his quiet hope that the neighborhood dogs will not bark tonight. It is the sound of loneliness made briefly visible, briefly shared, and then covered again by the ordinary silence of a building at night. And after Salamano leaves, Meursault goes to bed. The day is over. Tomorrow he will go to work. Nothing, really, has changed. Chapter 6. Introduction. Chapter 6 is the most important chapter in the entire story. Everything that has been quietly building across the previous 5 chapters, the heat, the violence, the moral passivity, the philosophical indifference, the unlikely alliance with Raymond, arrives at a single, catastrophic, irreversible moment on a beach outside Algiers. A man is shot dead, and the way it happens, the reasons behind it, and the way Meursault himself understands it, are also strange, so removed from conventional notions of motive and intention that they will become the central puzzle of the trial that occupies the entire second half of the story. This is the chapter where everything changes. The first 5 chapters were a quiet, precise portrait of an unusual man living an ordinary life in an ordinary city. From this chapter forward, that ordinary life is over. What remains is the world's attempt to understand and judge what happened on the beach, and its fundamental inability to do so on Meursault's own terms. The chapter falls into 2 distinct halves. The first half is warm, physical, full of the simple pleasures of swimming and food and good company, everything that Meursault values most about life. The second half is a slow, terrible descent into heat and light and violence. The contrast between these 2 halves is deliberate and devastating. A difficult morning. The chapter opens on Sunday morning, and Meursault is difficult to wake. Marie has to shake his shoulders and call his name repeatedly before he comes around. They want to get to the water early, so they skip breakfast. His head aches. His first cigarette of the morning tastes bitter and unpleasant. He's physically out of sorts, sluggish, heavy, not at his best. Marie, by contrast, is radiant. She is wearing a white dress with her hair loose, and when Meursault tells her she looks beautiful, she laughs with uncomplicated happiness. She is light and energetic and full of anticipation, where he is muted and slow. This contrast, her brightness against his heaviness, establishes, from the very first paragraphs, a tonal split that will deepen as the day progresses. They knock on Raymond's door on their way out. He is ready quickly, dressed in blue trousers and a white shirt, with a straw hat that makes Marie laugh. Meursault notices the details of Raymond's appearance with characteristic precision: the rather hairy forearms, the pale skin beneath, the straw hat that he finds slightly off. Raymond is cheerful and high-spirited, whistling as he comes down the stairs. When they step outside, the morning sun hits Meursault in the face with the force of a physical blow. He has been inside with the blind down, and the sudden intensity of the light is genuinely painful. Marie, meanwhile, is nearly dancing, declaring what a wonderful day it is. After a few minutes, Meursault begins to adjust and realizes he is hungry. He mentions this, but Marie does not respond. She is too absorbed in her own happiness to pay attention. Then, almost in passing, Meursault drops a piece of information that is actually extremely significant. The previous evening, he and Raymond had gone to the police station where Meursault gave formal evidence on Raymond's behalf, confirming that the woman Raymond had beaten had been unfaithful, thereby justifying Raymond's behavior in the eyes of the law. The police accepted this without verification and let Raymond off with a warning. This is covered in barely 2 sentences, delivered without any sense of importance. And yet it marks a meaningful moment. Meursault has now formally used his credibility as a witness to help a violent man escape legal consequences. He has done this without strong feeling, without moral evaluation, simply because Raymond asked and he had no reason to refuse. His moral passivity has now entered the official record. The Arabs, outside the tobacconists. As they set off for the bus stop, Raymond pulls Meursault's sleeve and points across the street. A group of Arab men are leaning against the window of the tobacconist's shop, watching them without expression. Raymond identifies one of them, the brother of the woman he had beaten. He seems briefly worried, though he quickly reassures them that it is ancient history, nothing to worry about. The Arabs are described as watching in a particular, unsettling way, staring as if the 3 of them were blocks of stone or dead trees. It is a dehumanizing description, and it sits uncomfortably in the narrative. These men have no names, no inner lives as the narrative presents them, no perspective. They are described entirely through the quality of their watching, silent, still, collectively present. This is one of the ways the story reflects the colonial context. It is set in a context where the Arab characters are largely rendered as threatening presences rather than full human beings. Marie wants to leave immediately. Raymond squares his shoulders in a performance of easy confidence and agrees they should go. Halfway to the bus stop, he looks back. The Arabs have not moved. They are still in the same position, looking at the same spot where the 3 of them had been standing. He, bus ride, an arrival at the beach. On the bus, Raymond is talkative and charming, directing his jokes and energy toward Marie. Meursault notices Raymond is attracted to her, but Marie gives him very little attention. She keeps catching Meursault's eye instead and smiling. They get off outside Algiers and walk to the beach. The approach is beautiful, yellow pebbles, wild white lilies against the hard metallic blue of an already intensely hot sky. Small houses with painted balconies, tamarisk trees, and then the sea itself, spread out flat and still and shining like polished metal. A distant headland juts over its own reflection. A small fishing boat is barely perceptible on the vast glittering surface. Marie swishes her bag through the flowers, sending petals flying, and picks rock iris. The morning is full of color and light and pleasant sensation, but the heat is already gathering. Raymond's friend, Masson, is waiting at his small wooden bungalow. A large, easy, generous man with a cheerful, plump wife who speaks with a Paris accent. Masson immediately makes them welcome, mentions fried fish for lunch. Meursault compliments the bungalow, and Masson says it is where he spends every weekend with his wife. Watching Marie and Masson's wife talking Israelian, laughing together, Meursault notes something quietly significant for the first time. he says. He seriously considers the possibility of actually marrying Marie, not as an abstract concession to her wishes, as in their recent conversation, but as a genuine, concrete possibility that the image of domestic warmth in front of him makes briefly real and imaginable. The morning swim. Masson wants to swim immediately. His wife and Raymond prefer to stay. So Meursault, Marie, and Masson go down to the beach together. Masson is a deliberate, slightly slow talker who has a habit of adding the phrase and what's more between his sentences, even when the second part adds nothing to the first. He says of Marie that she is a very pretty girl, and what's more, charming. Meursault stops paying attention to this verbal tick quickly. He is too absorbed in the sunlight, which is already making him feel better. The sand is hot underfoot. He waits a few moments before plunging in, simply enjoying the warmth and the anticipation. Then he GVs. The water is cold and immediately refreshing. He swims out fast, leaving Masson behind, and catches up with Marie. They swim a long way out together, side by side. And Meursault notices something that pleases him. The way their movements match, the way they are both in the same mood, both fully present in the pleasure of the moment. Out in the open water, they float on their backs, looking up at the sky. The sun draws the salt water from their lips and cheeks. Far below on the beach, Masson has returned and is lying on the sand, looking enormous, like a stranded whale. Then Marie proposes they swim in tandem. She goes ahead and he puts his arms around her waist from behind, and she pulls them both forward while he kicks. It is a small, intimate, playful thing, and it has a quality of pure, uncomplicated happiness. Eventually, he lets go and swims back alone, taking long, slow strokes, breathing deeply. On the beach, he lies face down beside Masson and tells him it is fine here. It is. When Marie comes back, glistening with salt water, she lies down beside him, and their combined warmth with the warmth of the sun sends him toward sleep. After a while, Marie pulls his arm and says it is nearly lunchtime. As they get up, she points out that he has not kissed her all morning. He acknowledges this is true. He had wanted to several times, but had not. They go back into the water briefly, and in the shallow waves, she wraps her arms and legs around him. His senses respond immediately and fully. It is warm and physical and real. Lunch and the first confrontation. Back at the bungalow, Masson calls them up from the steps. Lunch is extraordinary. Fresh fried fish, then steak and potato chips. Good bread. Masson keeps refilling Meursault's wine glass the moment it is empty. No one speaks much while eating. They are all simply eating, because they are hungry and the food is good. This is exactly the kind of moment Meursault values: physical pleasure, good company, present tense, enjoyment without performance or pretense. By the time coffee arrives, Meursault is slightly fuzzy from the wine. He smokes steadily. The three Masson, Raymond, and Meursault begin discussing a plan to spend the whole month of August together at the beach, sharing costs. It is a plan born of a pleasant morning and good food and the easy expansiveness that comes with wine and warmth. Marie suddenly exclaims that it is only 11:30. They had an extremely early lunch. Masson, unperturbed, says, "Lunch is a movable thing. You have it when you feel like it." Then Masson suggests a walk on the beach after eating. His wife naps after lunch. He says, though he finds it does not agree with him, he prefers a walk. Marie offers to stay and help with the washing up. The three men go out together. The lights outside at midday is almost vertical. It hammers down from directly overhead. The beach is deserted. The heat rising from the rocks makes it hard to breathe. Meursault is walking with his head slightly empty from the wine and the heat, not thinking much. Raymond and Masson are talking about people and things he does not know. Then he sees them. Two Arab men in blue dungarees, far down the beach, walking toward them. He glances at Raymond, who nods. That is his man. The three of them keep walking at the same pace. Masson wonders how they were tracked here. Meursault has a theory. They probably saw them taking the bus and recognized Marie's oilcloth bag, but he does not say anything. As the gap closes, Raymond gives his instructions quietly. Masson should handle the second Arab. Raymond will take his own. Meursault should stand ready to help if a third appears. Meursault says right. Masson puts his hands in his pockets. The confrontation is swift and brutal. Raymond goes straight at his man. Masson hits the other one twice, hard, and the man falls into the water face first, with bubbles rising around his head. Raymond is beating his man methodically. Blood is streaming from the Arab's face. Raymond shouts back at Meursault with something between triumph and warning. Then Meursault sees the knife. He calls out too late. The blade opens a wound on Raymond's arm and his mouth. Massan springs forward, but the Arabs regroup. The one with the knife holds them back, while his companion rises from the water and stands behind him. They back away steadily, watching, then turn and run. The three men stand still in the sunlight. Blood drips from Raymond's arm, which he is pressing hard above the elbow. Massan says there is a doctor nearby. Raymond agrees immediately. They help him back to the bungalow. Raymond insists the wounds are not serious and walks to the doctor with Massan. Meursault stays behind to explain things to the women. He does not enjoy this. He quickly runs out of things to say and sits smoking and staring at the sea. Marie has gone pale. Masson's wife is in tears. The bright, happy morning has split open. Raymond returns, and the second walk. Raymond comes back at about 1:30 with Matt. His arm is bandaged. A strip of plaster crosses the corner of his mouth. The doctor said nothing is seriously damaged, but Raymond is deeply gloomy. Masson tries to lift his mood without success. After a while, Raymond says he wants to go for a walk on the beach. He says he needs air. When Masson and Meursault offer to come, he flies into a sudden anger and tells them to leave him alone. Masson says quietly that they should not push him. He is clearly in a bad state. But when Raymond goes out, Meursault follows him anyway. This decision to follow Raymond alone, without being asked, without a clear reason, is one of the most significant moments in the chapter. Meursault does not explain why he goes. He simply goes. Perhaps he is concerned about what Raymond might do in his current state. Perhaps he is simply responding to the immediate, as he always does. Whatever the reason, he walks out into the furnace of the afternoon and follows. Outside it is almost beyond bearing. The light splintering off the sand and sea is described as flakes of fire. They walk a long way. Meursault wonders whether Raymond has a specific destination in mind, then doubts it. At the far end of the beach, beside a small freshwater stream that runs out from behind a large rock, they find the two Arabs again. They are lying on the sand, apparently at rest, apparently peaceful. The one who cut Raymond stares at him without speaking. The other is playing 3 notes on a small reed, over and over, watching the newcomers from the corner of his eye. For a long, still moment, nothing moves. The only sounds are the stream and the 3 repeated notes. Then Raymond reaches toward his revolver. The gun, in the philosophical moment, Meursault sees Raymond's hand move toward the weapon. He thinks quickly. If he tells Raymond not to shoot, Raymond in his current mood might become angry and do it anyway. So he says the first honest thing that comes to him, that it would be a low and cowardly thing to shoot a man who has not yet spoken. The Arabs still have not moved. Raymond considers this. He proposes instead to say something insulting. If the Arab responds, then he will fire. Meursault tells him that if the Arab does not draw his knife, Raymond has no right to shoot. Raymond fidgets. The man with the reed keeps playing. Then Meursault makes a remarkable suggestion. He tells Raymond to take the man on the right and to give him the revolver. If the other Arab causes trouble or draws a knife, Meursault will shoot. Raymond hands over the gun. The revolver glints in the sun. And now, in one of the most philosophically extraordinary moments in the entire story, Meursault has a thought. He thinks, one might fire or not fire, and it would come to absolutely the same thing. This thought, delivered quietly in the middle of a standoff on a sun-blasted beach, is the purest expression of the story's philosophical core that we have seen so far. For Meursault, in this moment, the 2 options are genuinely equivalent. Fire or do not fire, it is all the same. The universe does not care. The outcome is the same in any meaningful sense. There is no cosmic weight pressing one option over the other. This is not nihilism in the sense of not caring about anything. It is something more unsettling, a genuine philosophical conviction that actions are not ranked by any external or transcendent scale of significance. What happens, happens. What one does or does not do is equally real and equally meaningless in the indifferent universe. Then the Arabs disappear. They slip away under the rock like lizards. Raymond relaxes. He starts talking about the bus home. The crisis has passed. They walk back to the bungalow. They return alone and the fatal walk. At the bungalow, Raymond goes up the steps, but Meursault stops at the bottom. He cannot face going in. The effort of climbing the step, of entering the cool interior and making pleasant conversation with the women who are still shaken from the morning's violence, feels too much. But staying outside in the blinding heat is equally unbearable. To go in or to stay, it comes to the same thing. This echo of his earlier thought is not accidental. After a moment, Meursault turns and walks back toward the beach. He is not going anywhere in particular. He is simply moving, because staying was as impossible as going in. The beach is empty and red in the afternoon light. Small waves slap at the hot sand in what the narrative describes as short, breathless movements. Meursault walks toward the far end of the beach, toward the rock. As he walks, the light presses down on him physically. It swells in his temples, tries to stop his progress. He sets his jaw and keeps going. Every flash of light off a shell or a piece of broken glass makes him tighten. He will not be beaten, he thinks. He walks on. He is heading for the rock, for the stream behind it, for the shade, for the cool sound of running water. He is seeking relief from the heat and the glare and the accumulated strain of the day. He simply wants something cool and quiet. He wants to be out of the sun. And here is where the chapter turns, slowly and inevitably, toward what comes next. The Arab at the rock. When Meursault gets close to the rock, he sees that the Arab has come back. He is alone this time, lying on his back with his hands behind his head. The rock shelters his face from the direct sun, but his body is exposed to the full force of the afternoon heat. His dungarees are visibly steaming. Meursault is genuinely surprised. He had assumed the whole business was over. He had not thought about it on his walk down here. He was simply looking for shade and water. Finding the Araby here feels like a collision with something he had mentally set aside. As Meursault approaches, the Arab raises himself slightly, and his hand moves toward his pocket. Meursault, responding to this automatic gesture, grips the revolver in his own pocket, the gun Raymond gave him. The Arab then sinks back again, but his hand stays near his pocket. They are about 10 yards apart. Most of the time, Meursault sees the Arab as a blurred, dark shape in the heat haze. Occasionally, he catches the glint of eyes between almost closed lids. The waves are slow and faint. The light is as fierce as it has been all day. No relief, no softening. The sun seems to have been suspended at the same position in the sky for hours, as if time has stopped or frozen. Meursault knows clearly and honestly that he could simply turn around and walk back. He acknowledges this explicitly. He could turn, go back, and think no more about any of it. The Arab is lying still. The situation is not forcing his hand. The rational, self-preserving thing to do is simply to leave. But the beach is pressing against his back. The heat is pressing into his forehead. He takes a few steps forward toward the stream. The Arab still does not move. There is still distance between them. The Arab's face is in shadow, and something about the angle makes it look to Meursault, half blinded by heat and sweat, as if he might be grinning. The heat is now like the heat at his mother's funeral. He makes this connection himself, explicitly. The same pressure on his forehead, the same sense of the sun beating directly into him, the same veins swelling in his temples. The past and the present blur. He is on a beach, but he's also on a road in following his mother's coffin through a landscape that felt inhuman and indifferent and overwhelming. He cannot stand it any longer. He takes one more step forward. He knows it is pointless. Moving a yard closer to the rock will not get him out of the sun. He knows it makes no sense, but he takes the step anyway. Teaga is shooting. The Arab draws his knife. He holds it up into the sunlight, and a shaft of light shoots off the blade directly into Meursault's eyes. At the same moment, the sweat that has been building in his eyebrows releases and floods down over his eyelids, covering them. He is essentially blinded. Salt water and the knife's reflected light create a wall of burning brightness in front of his face. What happens next is described in terms that are deliberately sensory and overwhelming rather than deliberate or intentional. Meursault does not think, "I will shoot this man." He does not make a decision in any conventional sense. What he experiences is a total overload of sensation, the sun crashing against his skull like cymbals, the blade of light from the knife seeming to pierce his forehead, his entire body strung tight, every nerve at its limit. And then the gun fires. The trigger gives. He does not fire it so much as it happens. The mechanism of his tensed body and the pressure of the moment produce the shot almost as if the gun fires itself. The physical description is careful and important. The smooth surface of the gun in his palm, the trigger giving under his grip, the sharp crack of the shot. It is described as a physical event, not a decision. The shot lands. There is a brief return to clarity, as if the shot has broken the spell. The blinding light, the crushing weight of the sun, the veil of sweat and brightness, all of it lifts for a moment. Meursault understands with perfect lucidity that he has shattered the peace of the day. He knows what he has done. He knows what it means, and then he fires 4 more times. This is the most chilling detail in the chapter. The first shot might be explained, or at least complicated, by the overwhelming sensory conditions, by the blinding light, by the Arab's knife, by the heat and the physical overload, and the strange frozen quality of the moment. But for more shots into a body that is no longer moving, into a man who is already down. This is not a moment of accidental reflex. This is something else. Meursault himself describes it as knocking on the door of his undoing. He knows, in this moment, that what he has done is final and catastrophic. He knows it has consequences that will unfold from this point forward. He describes each shot as another knock on that door. Not outside forces knocking on his door, but him knocking on his own. The role of the heat and light. Throughout the entire second half of this chapter, the heat and light are not background details. They are active forces, almost characters in themselves. The sun pressing down on Meursault's bare head, the light splintering off the sand and water, the blade of reflection from the knife, all of these are described with an intensity and a physicality that makes them feel genuinely coercive. This is not an excuse for what Meursault does, but it is an explanation of how it was experienced, and experienced honestly. The heat at the beach is connected explicitly to the heat at his mother's funeral. The same overwhelming physical sensation, the same pressure in the temples, the same swelling veins, the same sense of a force pressing in from outside that cannot be argued with or reasoned through. The story is not saying that the son Meursault pulled the trigger. It is saying something more subtle, that for a man like Meursault, whose primary relationship with the world is physical and sensory rather than abstract and deliberate, the accumulated physical pressure of a day like this one is not irrelevant to what he does. He is not a man who acts from ideology or passion or calculation. He is a man who responds to the immediate, and the immediate, on this afternoon, is an overwhelming wall of heat and light and the flash of a blade. When he fires with his senses rather than with his mind. And this, more than anything else, is what the world will find incomprehensible and unforgivable about him. The significance of the 4 additional shots. Much critical attention has been paid to those 4 additional shots, and rightly so. If the first shot can be read as involuntary, a physical response to an impossible sensory overload, the 4 that follow cannot. There are several ways to understand them. One is that Meursault is still in the grip of the overwhelming physical and psychological state that produced the first shot, that the return of clarity he mentions is only partial, and the 4 shots are the continuation of a moment that has not yet fully ended. Another interpretation is that the 4 shots represent something else, a kind of doubling down, an unconscious confirmation of what has already happened. Once the first shot has been fired, the balance of the day, the fragile equilibrium that Meursault has been navigating all his life, is already broken. Nothing that follows can make it more broken, to fire or not to fire. In that moment, after the first shot, comes to absolutely the same thing. A third interpretation connects to the philosophical thought Meursault had earlier, that firing or not firing would come to the same thing. Perhaps the 4 additional shots are the enactment of that philosophy. A man who genuinely does not believe that one action is more or less significant than another, expressing that belief in the most terrible possible way. None of these interpretations completely explains the 4 shots. They remain the most disturbing and most difficult moment in the chapter, the moment where Meursault's strangeness crosses from philosophical into something that the world can only read as monstrous. The Arab as a character. It is important to pause and acknowledge something that the narrative itself largely fails to do. The man who is shot is a human being. He has a name that is never given. He has a face that is never clearly seen by Meursault. He has a life, a history, a sister or girlfriend who was beaten by Raymond. He came to the beach for reasons that the narrative does not explore. He is, in the story as written, largely an absence, a dark blur in the heat haze, a pair of glinting eyes, a knife catching the sun. This is one of the ways the story reflects the colonial context of French Algeria, a world in which Arab characters are systematically rendered as less than fully human, as threats or presences, rather than as people with inner lives. The man who dies on the beach is not given the dignity of a name or a perspective. He is the victim of both Raymond's original violence and Meursault's final act, and the story does not mourn him in any direct way. This is worth sitting with, because it is one of the most troubling aspects of the narrative. Not a flaw that can be easily dismissed, but a reflection of the colonial structure of the world the story inhabits, and, to some degree, themes at their full. The indifference of the physical world, the sun on the beach, is the story's most extreme statement of the universe's indifference to human suffering and human choices. It beats down regardless. It does not adjust for grief or violence or moral significance. It simply is, overwhelming and constant, and entirely without concern for what happens beneath it. The collapse of deliberate action, the shooting, is presented as something that happens at the intersection of physical overload and the philosophical suspension of meaningful choice. Meursault does not decide to kill the Arab in any conventional sense. The act is produced by a convergence of forces that overwhelm his capacity for deliberate choice. And yet, the 4 additional shots complicate this entirely. Those, at least, are not accidental. The accumulation of consequence, everything in the first 5 chapters, has led here. The letter Meursault wrote for Raymond, the testimony he gave at the police station, the revolver he accepted, the walk he took back down the beach alone, each small decision, each moment of passive acceptance, each instance of going along without strong reason has contributed to this moment. The catastrophe is not a bolt from the blue. It is the end of a chain. The end of the ordinary. The chapter begins with Marie in a white dress and ends with a man dead on the sand. The distance between those 2 images is the distance between the life Meursault had and the life he will now have. Everything that follows will be the world's attempt to understand what happened in between, and the world, as we will see, will understand it entirely wrong. Conclusion. Chapter 6 is one of the most remarkable chapters in all of modern literature. It is a chapter in which nothing is simple. Not the shooting, not the motivations behind it, not the heat, not the philosophical framework that Meursault brings to the moment, not the colonial context that renders the victim largely invisible, not the accumulated chain of small passive choices that led Meursault here. The shooting on the beach is not presented as a crime of passion. It is not presented as self-defense in any clean sense. It is presented as what it is, the convergence of heat and light and accumulated passivity and philosophical indifference and physical overwhelm, producing an act that Meursault himself knows. In the moment is the beginning of his undoing. He fires 4 more shots into the still body, and each one, he says, is another knock on the door of his destruction. The door is open now, and from the second half of the story forward, what waits on the other side will come flooding in.